sorted. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Meg.
Thank you.
Wendy, sorry, it's Simone. I can't see the chat either.
Right, just bear with me a
So that
second.
might be a slight issue if I'm trying to keep my eye on, you know, any issues.
Just bear with me a second and I'll add you in.
Okay. Thanks, Wendy.
I don't know if we're going to continue.
Sorry, Wendy, I can't see the chat either.
That may be as a sub, I think.
Can you hear me? But out of the blue, it will suddenly unmute me. And I promise it's nothing I'm doing because I'm not touching anything. Right, so we will start the meeting. First of all, could I welcome everyone to the meeting this evening. As you heard, it is being live streamed, and could I also welcome Grant Patterson and Nicola Coombe from our external auditors, Grant Thornton. I'll move straight on to item 1, which is announcements. Sorry. So I've lost the band altogether now, Wendy. Don't know what on earth is going on. Ah, we're back. Right. Item 1 is announcements. First of all, could you please make sure all your phones are either switched off or turned to silent? And as you know, the meeting is being recorded and live streamed. I will, in the event that there is a technical problem with the live stream, I will be notified and I may have to adjourn the meeting until the fault is resolved. The live broadcast will be turned off after agenda item 17 to enable the confidential item to be discussed. There may be a short pause whilst it is turned off, and also to allow anyone who is not involved in that item to leave the meeting. Please, can I ask that all attendees set their microphones to mute at the start of the meeting?
I think we may have lost Councillor Tandy.
Hello, can anybody hear me? I can't hear anything. Hello?
No, I think we may have lost
hear you.
Councillor Tandy. Just wait to see if she can rejoin.
Oh, I think she's back with us. Can you hear us, Jean?
You have to unmute yourself, June.
Councillor Tandy, you're muted.
Right, I'm back on now. Sorry, everything went blank and I had to come back into the meeting. I'll try again. As I was saying, please can I ask that everyone sets their microphones to mute at the start of the meeting, and please only unmute your microphone to speak when you're invited to do so. You're also asked to indicate by clicking on the hand icon. Requests to speak will be taken in the order they are received by myself, and opportunities to speak more than once on an agenda item will be at my discretion. And please remember to click on the hand icon immediately after you have finished speaking. If there is a recommendation proposed and seconded and there is no dissension, I will declare it to be carried. If there is either a proposal or an amendment moved and members wish to speak, please only speak to that proposal or amendment as it is written. When we go to a vote, the legal officer will read out the names of committee members in alphabetical order. Please unmute your microphone when you hear your name called and respond with for, against, or abstain. After the vote is taken, the legal officer will then announce the result of the vote. Furthermore, I have been notified of an item at agenda 16, any other item where Councillor Evans wishes to ask me a question. Moving on to item 2 on the agenda, apologies. I'm informed that there have been no apologies submitted for this meeting.
Councillor Tandy, sorry, if I can just make you aware that Councillor Beaumont is here as substitute for Councillor Elliott.
Right, yes, I heard that before I slipped out of the meeting. Wendy, thank you. Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Is it agreed? There is a, do we agree that the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of November be confirmed? No, sorry, they were the last minutes. The minutes of the last meeting, do we agree they're a true and correct record?
Agree.
Okay. There seems to be no dissension, so we will agree that they are carried. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest other than those that are already printed? Okay. No, thank you. Item 5, public consultation. We have no members of the public who have requested to speak on the item. I have notification that Councillor Condacor wishes to speak on items 6, 8, 10 and 12. And on item 12, Councillor Wilson has indicated he wishes to speak, and Councillor Hancock has submitted a written statement. I will call those people as we move forward throughout the meeting. Thank you. Moving on to the reports, agenda item 6, which is the objections report. I think, Grant, that you were going to present this report, if you could, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Before I start, just a background to where we are. You've got 3 papers in front of you today from us as your external auditors. One is the objections report, and then the other 2 link into the planning in relation to the 2019-20 audit. As members may well have noted, Nicola Coombe is joining me today as your audit manager. Javad Akhtar, who was the previous audit manager, he's had to leave the country to deal with some personal business, some personal matters. That was planned to happen in March and April, but as with the impact of COVID-19, he's had to delay that. So he's now had to leave the country. Therefore, Nicola is going to be joining me as your audit manager to see the audit 2019-20 audit through. Nicola will take you through the next 2 papers, but just as way of introduction, I've worked with Nicola for a number of years now. I'm sure Councillor Tandy, you're aware that she used to be audit manager on the Combined Authority, so you would have seen her there. And I'm currently working with Nick on Leicester City Council. Very experienced audit manager, already has met with Craig and the finance team and hitting the ground running. So I'm confident that we will deliver 2019-20 audit as provided. But Nick will introduce himself a bit more when we come on to the next paper. So in terms of the first paper, which is in respect of an update on objections, I will take it that members have had opportunity to read through it. In terms of that, as I say, we have been working our way through 4 objections. The first one, and I'm now looking at page, I believe it's 14 in your pack, in terms of the overall objections. The first one was it to a small amount paid to a local society. We determined that, given the sums involved, not to formally consider that objection on the grounds that it was disproportionate to the sums related to, and that's in line with the 3-step process as highlighted in the appendix to the report. Having said that, we did provide information from officers and were satisfied that there was really no further action that we need to take as your auditors. So the 2 that I'm reporting on today are in relation to, one, in respect of the cost that the council incurred defending itself in a court case linked to a lease around the equestrian centre, and second one in relation to the cost of purchasing and operating the mobile climbing tower. Right, just trying to move on. My screen is stuck. So, right. Okay, I'll try and do this. Sorry, members, my pack has decided to stick. So moving on to page 15, which is the equestrian centre lease. Now this does go back a couple of years and was in relation to the renewal and termination of the lease in relation to the equestrian centre, and as I say, a subsequent court case that the council found itself in. I think in summary, as part of our review, we have reviewed the legal advice received by the council and the settlement agreement. All councils are able to defend themselves against legal action, and in our view, the council acted reasonably in seeking the appropriate legal advice and acted in accordance with it when defending the original claim. And it also gave reasonable consideration to the advice it received in respect of recovering costs when reaching a settlement. In relation to specific questions, we did not find any legal costs being picked up by the council in respect to the trustees who were named parties in the action, and the settlement itself makes no reference to any costs that might or might not have been incurred by those trustees. So overall, I suppose in that objection, we're satisfied that the council had the powers and exercised those reasonably in defending itself. I think what we did note actually as part of our overall review, though, was we were asked specifically about whether to put the cost of that settlement into the public domain. As there was no evidence the council acted unreasonably or significant weaknesses, we do not consider it would be appropriate for us to seek to place that information in the public domain for a report in the public interest in relation to that. What we did note, however, was in terms of, and quite appropriately in many ways, the council was looking at the lease to a commercial provider and which was also providing services for disabled riders. You issued a lease at a reduced rental income. And I think what we did notice was that there were certain terms that the providers of those services would need to meet for that rental income to justify that reduction. And at the time we conducted our work, there weren't any mechanisms in place for the council to get feedback or confirmation that those conditions were being met. So what we have done is made a recommendation that the council does put in appropriate arrangements to ensure that it gets that assurance that those conditions are being met in relation to that reduced lease payment. Moving on to the second one, which is on page 17 in relation to the climbing tower provision. And I do note that I think Internal Audit have got an update to this as well as part of their update later in the agenda pack. The objection in that sense that we received was in relation to the cost of purchasing and operating, and it wasn't actually providing value for money for the council. Through our work, we concluded that the provision of the tower was consistent with what the council's published corporate objectives were, but also that the operation of the tower, it was inextricably linked to the operation of the council sports development team. The reorganisation and restructuring of that team did impact upon the overall delivery, and therefore we did confer that the council was unable to operate the tower as frequently as it would have wished, and this in turn has led to a relatively expensive cost per climb, and we would say indicative of not achieving value for money. However, I mean, in terms of looking at value for money, it's more than just cost, and we did note that the council had kept a record of the total number of events the tower was delivered to and the number of climbs for each event. I think our key finding from this one was, however, there wasn't any specific key performance indicators that were set out in the original business case. The council does apply the Prince 2 methodology. There was a business case, but I think what we did see as your auditors was there wasn't any clear measure of what success would look like in relation to that. So we've made recommendations in respect of both business planning and in respect of being clear about the objectives of the council and how do you measure achievement against those objectives as part of the recommendations coming out of this objection. And that's what we were saying there also is where the council is outsourced, the council is sure that it has appropriate contract monitoring performance metrics in place and its objectives are clearly articulated in those areas. So I think we would agree that in terms of what the objector has raised, that there were challenges in terms of value for money. I think our view as your auditors were, given the sums involved, I think there are lessons to be learned in those respects around maybe challenging a bit more at the beginning of that process in terms of identifying all the potential risks. We don't want to stop councils being innovative. I think that's the way that councils need to work and attempting, to do innovative services for the public. But at the same time, I think it's on this one, whilst there was a plan in place, I think the areas around here was there a clear measure of what you would deem to be success? You certainly have powers to subsidise these elements, but were there clear elements of success within that? So again, we've exercised discretion not to issue a public interest report, but we have made recommendations in respect of improvement areas around business planning and setting key performance indicators. So those are the key findings coming out of that. And in our appendix, we've made those recommendations with management responses. So I'm happy to stop there and take questions that members may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Grant. Does any member, Councillor Evans, please?
Sorry, Chair, I put down public speaker on this one.
Yes, you did, Councillor. Yes, you did. Go on, Councillor Condacor, my apologies.
Thank you very much, Chair. This has been a very, very long story. These objections are to things that happened in 2016, and thankfully the management and leadership of the council have changed now, so those responsible for these episodes are mostly no longer with the council. However, it is important to learn the lessons from these two very different but important cases. On the equestrian centre, the whole thing was very acrimonious and I think done very badly. A gagging order, I understand, has been signed with the equestrian centre. So in payment of its costs or whatever happened at the end, we are not allowed to know. But it's been a very sorry tale and we should never go into this again. And I hope lessons are learned, and I know many of those involved in this are no longer with the council. On the climbing wall, there was my wife in June 2015, 5 years ago, who advised strongly against going ahead with the climbing wall without the council understanding how complicated it is, the level of training required and the skill required not only to instruct on a climbing wall, but also to drive a four-wheel vehicle with an 8-metre trailer. This was not an easy project, the climbing wall, and I think we rushed into it as a council with our eyes shut and far too much optimism. There was never a proper business case written at the time. The business case was written after the decision was taken to buy it. And then it was decided we need training. So it was an absolute mess, which has cost us £200,000. And we urgently need lessons learned. And it's really disappointing that this process has taken 3 years from the close of the accounts in 2017 to actually get to this stage. These investigations and lessons learned should take 6 months, not 3 years. Thank you, Chair.
Do you need to reply to that, Grant, or would you like me to take another 2 speakers first?
I don't think I formally need to reply. I mean, I think I have spoken to the committee before and to Councillor Condacor, and I do accept that that ideally we would conclude these a lot quicker. And what I can say is I'm taking those lessons away as well. We will bring the final one objection to the September meeting. But should these matters happen again, we should be looking to complete these within 6 to 9 months, and I accept that as feedback, and certainly I'll be learning to take that forward as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Grant. Councillor Evans.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it may probably be a question more for officers rather than for the grant. But when I was reading the report on page 17, I did come across the point that Grant has just raised about performance indicators in relation to the climbing tower provision. That's on page 17 at the bottom paragraph. I just wanted to understand what the rationale was behind not including any performance indicators within the business case for the climbing tower, because I can't think of any council service that does not have any performance indicators. So I just wondered why the council didn't include any on this occasion.
Okay, I'll take Councillor Tromans and then we can see who is going to answer the questions. Councillor Tromans, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, in respect of the Equestrian Centre, I think the most valuable and interesting and illuminating bit of the report is the final paragraph. The work noted that the council has no mechanisms in place to assure that the terms of leases are being adhered to. I mean, that sounds pretty fundamental, and I think that's another piece of work that probably needs to come out of this. Linda or Grant Thornton or somebody needs to pick that up and get to the bottom of why a large organisation like the council doesn't have any mechanisms in place to make sure people are adhering to the terms of their leases with us. The second point is the climbing tower provision. It's hard, Grant, not to challenge your conclusions there. I'm looking at the report, and you're referring to Prince 2, and I kind of rack my brains for what the definition of that is, and for the benefit of everyone else, Prince 2 is a project management methodology widely adopted around the world, used by people and organisations from all different sectors. It guides you through the essentials of managing successful projects. It's based around defining what you want to achieve and what the success criteria is. So I'm not quite sure how we square that with your statement. We were satisfied that the council, through its use of Prince 2, has appropriate arrangements in place for preparing business cases for projects and following appropriate procedures. Clearly, you identified they had no measurement of success and no qualifying criteria of this is what needs to be achieved by this date. They didn't even have an end result requirement. So I'm not sure that we can square what actually happened with your statement about Prince 2. So I feel I need to challenge that. And to me, looking at the report and from what we've heard from others, it sounds like it was bought on a whim and cost us a fortune. And actually, there really probably should be a report in the public interest. But I'll let you respond to that.
Thank you. I'll call Councillor Brown, who was indicating, then perhaps, Grant, you could answer the questions that you have been asked at the end of that. Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Tromans has pretty much covered the majority of everything I was going to say about Prince 2 and the use of its methodology. But what I would like to add to that is that if we're using Prince 2 project management, which after all is, to the best of my recollection of doing projects using it, it's a process-led management, project management tool. And so then how can we square the fact that we've appropriately used this methodology, but not come up with any key performance objectives as part of the project management? Surely, if we've had this in place and we've used it appropriately, then we should have had those KPIs in place from the outset. And the fact that we didn't means that the council has failed in its use of that project management tool, or is there some other explanation that I've missed? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Grant, would you like to respond, please?
Right, Chair, I'll try and take them in order as they came in. Yeah, in terms of mechanisms for reviewing leases, my observation would be, I think the specific comment there was in relation to those leases where you've granted a reduction in the rental amounts, and just making sure then that that the people still would be eligible to that reduction in rent. So I think it was more specifically around looking at the where you've contracts in relation to reduced rentals as opposed to maybe just general rental sums. So I don't think it's necessarily a generic thing across the whole of looking at leases. I think most of those would be managed on a more general level and making sure that rental incomes are there with follow-up. Officers can probably provide more detail than that than I can. In relation to the climbing tower, I think there is and clearly the objection, the response, which can't be put in the public domain, goes into a bit more detail around that. I think what I was trying to say there in relation to the use of Prince 2 is we don't always see that, I'll be honest, at district council level. So I think it is an observation that you have, as a council, sought to put the appropriate arrangements in place, and Prince 2, which I can't exactly, is project reporting initiation. I think it goes on for that, and evaluation is a methodology. So I think in terms of that, I was saying that the council is using an appropriate methodology. I think within the actual business case itself, and again, I can't necessarily put that, I've got to be careful what I can put into the public domain. Elements were discovered, were put in, and there was coverage of expected income streams, except within that business case. But again, I think what we were just missing, from my perspective, was at the end of that was looking at what success looked like. So I think in that sense, I think there was a process that went through. I think part of it was, and I think this is where the recommendation comes in, was iterative. In other words, not all risks, and I think that's as we've heard from Councillor Ngandaka, were identified at the beginning. And I think some of that might be due to the size of the council, the innovation, or the way that is operating. So I think overall, I think the conclusion comes in is Prince 2 is used, and that means you should have appropriate arrangements in place. The observation we had was there were elements of it in terms of the timing. It was iterative, and then there was a feedback loop, and it did go through a number of meetings. It was debated by cabinet and by committees and council. So it's not that there wasn't a discussion of the project. So it wasn't necessarily a whim. Members were involved in that decision-making process. I think what we're looking at there was that end part around, well, what would success look like for you if it didn't succeed in terms of generating full income to I suppose to wash its face, is that wasn't clear going through there in terms of what subsidy that members were willing to accept. So that's where that comes from. In terms of a public interest report, some of the factors we do count is the cost and relevance to the council of undertaking that. It is a significant sum if I go through that process. So I think it was on balance in relation to, we haven't identified what I suppose we would say a significant failings in that sense. It's one project, and on balance we decided that public interest report would not be required, and there was a suitable amount in the public domain. So that's where that conclusion comes from.
Thank you. Councillor Tromans and Councillor Brown, can you put your hands down, please? You've left. Could you mute yourselves, please? Thank you very much. Right, thank you, Grant. Okay, if we could move on to...
Chair, is it possible to have a response from an officer regarding my question or not?
Mr. Richardson, or...
I'm happy to repeat it again if needs be. But...
Chair, is that in relation to the performance indicators? I think that was the question, wasn't it?
Yes, it seems so.
I think if Phil may be able to assist with this as well, but I believe it was predominantly for there were health and activity reasons that the climbing tower was purchased for, and I think there were sort of health. The general idea behind purchasing the climbing tower was around improving health and activity, and I guess that is more difficult to set very short-term performance indicators on because it's a much longer-term quality of life indicator. But as I said, Phil may be able to assist with that one as well.
Phil, is there anything you can say to help?
Not really, Chair. Only to reiterate what Simone's just said, and just to say, I think what Grant was getting at was that those weren't articulated fully in the business case that was ultimately approved. So that's the lesson learnt in terms of moving forward. I don't know whether Kevin's at this meeting, but Kevin obviously was sort of instrumental in pulling that together. So whether he's got anything specific he can assist Councillor Evans with, I don't know.
Thank you. Well, it seems that I'm not sure that that Kevin has actually joined the meeting as yet, although he will be with us later. But Councillor Evans, I will ensure that Kevin Hollis gets a response. Oh, sorry, he's just appeared. Kevin. Kevin, do you want to give a response on that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Just really to add to what Simone and Phil have already said, and also Grant in terms of the income streams, it was very much about an innovative delivery in the community and taking that activity out into local settings and trying something new to increase and improve health and well-being, and especially activities that weren't formal related to our leisure centres. So that was some of the performance indicators and delivery actions to do that, and also take it to community events linked to the town centre and event delivery. It was around providing a new activity linked to the Olympics to encourage and try and reach those communities in engagement with those young people that don't or wouldn't normally be part of leisure facility, the sort of swim, gym and indoor sports facilities activities. Yes, there are lessons learned. I think we all understand that, and in terms of the complexities of that, and obviously also the changes in the team and restructures had an effect on that. But I think in terms of that, then nothing more really to add, Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. Okay. The questions have been responded. Obviously, officers would would be quite prepared to speak with you outside of the meeting if you wish to. So we will move on to agenda item 7, which is informing the audit risk assessment. I think we're back to you, Grant, please.
Yeah, I'm going to pass over to Nick to take you through this one, Chair.
Yeah, fine. Hello, Nicola.
Hello, Chair. Good to see you again. Hello, everyone. As Grant said, I am not Jav. I'm Nick Coombe, and the baton has been passed to me while Jav is out of the country. So without further ado, let's look at the next item on the agenda, which is a document which informs our audit risk assessment. Is something we take into consideration when we're putting our audit plan together. So basically, the purpose of bringing this here is twofold, really. It's part of our evidence of two-way communication between ourselves and you as those charged with governance, setting out considerations of specific matters of fraud, laws and regulations, going concern, related parties and accounting estimates. And it's an iterative document. You will have seen this document in the past, and I think this year is no exception to the fact that it needs to be iterative. In fact, arguably, I guess the requirement for us to revisit this is even more important this year, because since this was first talked through with officers, obviously the pandemic has hit, so we'll go back and have a look and see whether some of these responses need to be updated as things move on. Clearly, the council has got business continuity plans in place to allow it to continue to operate with functions being remote, and the fact we're all sat here having a meeting is evidence of that. And our understanding is that controls and processes in place to mitigate risks identified continue to work as they always have, but clearly we are in unusual times, and therefore it's important for us to update our understanding of any changes to the council's governance processes as things move forward, if and when they're made in response to any changing requirements that might happen in the future. So what do we want you to do? Well, the report sets out basically where we're required to make inquiries of the committee under auditing standards. And the way we've done that is set out a series of questions under those headings that I mentioned earlier on. But as a starter for 10, the responses have been populated through consultation with council officers. So what basically we'd like you to do having taken the report as read, is just to consider whether the responses that have been made by management are consistent with your understanding, and whether there are any further comments you wish to make. Now, I would say obviously this was written at a point in time, and there's a few comments in there that mention to things happening as part of the financial statements preparation, which we'll obviously pick up as part of our year-end audit. But over to you, really, for any comments you wish to make. Does it align with your understanding of the council? Do you recognise your organisation from the responses that are there?
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on this particular item? I have. Oh, sorry, Councillor Evans.
Yes, thank you, Nicola, for introducing this report. I just wondered on question number 9, where it states, other than in-house solicitors, can you provide details of those solicitors utilised by the council during the year? And then it gives the answer. Is there any reason why the answer given by the council does not make reference to the solicitors that were used during the local plan hearings?
Do you want to reply, Nicola?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, it's probably one for officers. Really, that's a helpful comment for us, because part of this process is making sure we're aware of everything. So if there's something that we haven't taken into account there, then that's useful to know.
Okay, Simone, did you want to answer at that point?
Yeah, I think Phil's indicating on that one, okay. Councillor Tandu.
Okay. Philip.
Yes, thank you, Chair. No external solicitors were used on the local plan process. However, Council was instructed to act on behalf of the council.
Thank you. Right, is there any further speakers on this item? If not, could I thank Nicola for the report and her presentation, and hopefully hope to see you again at some point, Nicola, and hear from you. Now, if we could move to agenda item 8, which is the external audit plan year ending the 31st of March. Councillor Condacott, I understand you wish to speak on this item.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just doing all my pressing buttons. Yeah, just a few things that really were glaring on this, particularly the role of NAVCell. And I know this is the sort of looking back audit plans always, but there's clearly a risk as we've had COVID to the value of our properties, both NAVCell properties and commercial properties like 22 Queen's Road. There's also investments the council's made in its property fund. I think we've got about a couple of million in the property fund to actually give us an income, but that obviously carries a capital risk. And I'm always alarmed that this council or councillors say, oh, house prices and property prices always go up. I think they've far too much played down the risks to property capital values. So I think I wanted to make that point. The other point I really noticed was down the bottom of the report where it talks about raising the bar. So obviously an audit doesn't look through every single thing in an audit, and yeah, it would be £1 million, whatever, if we audited every single transaction and checked everything. But I was most interested in this raising the bar item, which is £2,500 more cost for the audit. But basically, it seemed to say the audit needs to be more robust, not just believe the council when it says X is worth whatever. And I think Grant Thornton and other auditors have failed in the past to do tough enough audits. So it seems a very positive move to raise the bar. I don't know if the Grant Thornton can sort of describe a bit more what's going on with raising the bar in terms of what we haven't been doing and what the changes will be going forward in the audit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Keith. Grant, I apologise. I should have asked you to present your report before I brought Councillor Condacott in. Perhaps you'd like to do it now, and then possibly, if you need to, respond to Councillor Condacott.
Okay, actually, in a way, Councillor Condacott's comments are quite helpful because they probably do lead in, and actually, you're going to see Nick sooner than you thought, actually, because she's going to start off on the first part. I'll start off maybe with the last point that was made in respect of raising the bar. Yeah, I don't think we'd say that we'd failed. I wouldn't use those words. But I think what we are getting is, and I'm sure members have spoken before, is we ourselves are regulated, and that challenge for us comes from the Financial Reporting Council. And I think where they are coming from is, and I think this year specifically it will come in as well, is asking auditors, I suppose, to be more sceptical and challenging. Now, primarily around in relation to, from the FRC's perspective, and I might not necessarily agree that this is the correct area of focus in the public sector per se, around those areas that require big estimations. And that one of those is, as the councillor pointed out, is around asset valuations. And I think in terms of that, and actually what we've done in the past is we've always gone to valuers' reports and elements like that. The FRC is saying, actually, you need to go a step beyond that now. You need to either get your own expert in, or you need to be more challenging of assumptions that the valuers have used around that. And you need to be more challenging, and certainly and around pension funds, they're expecting us to go to the next level almost in terms of challenge. So I don't think that we've been doing anything wrong. I think we would say that they have begun to move the goalpost to a certain extent. And if we want to, I think, as I said before at previous audit committees, is when the original contract was let, FRC has a scoring mechanism of 1, 2A, 2B, and 3, where 3 is a fail, 1 is absolutely brilliant. 2B was always seen to be an acceptable level of quality, with some improvements. FRC has now moved and said every audit, not just Grant Thornton, every audit firm needs to move to get about 8 or 9% of their audits into 2A. So that's what part of that raising the bar is if we're going to do that, then we need to be able to demonstrate that more skepticism, more challenge in that area. So that's really what raising the bar is all about. It's not just Grant Thornton, it's across the whole of the audit regime. And I'm sure members are aware there are a number of external reviews going on. The primary one that will impact on the local government is the Redmond review, and that is looking at that local audit and how that is delivered. So that is really where that raising the bar comes from. I think we have done a quality audit for you, and as a firm, certainly our quality scores in respect to the public sector have always been good. So I think we have been doing a quality audit for you in line with auditing standards. But again, I think the answer is to be more sceptical and more challenging. And actually, there's one thing that you will see coming through here specifically when Nick takes us through the plan, is when we do look at COVID-19 and the impact upon that around year-end valuations, certainly when markets maybe were not operating as you would expect right at the end of March, certainly in property, investment property, etc. like that. So we will be doing that. Going back to the original point, I think the first question was around NABCEL, and clearly that as a standalone company that is subject to its own audit. What's in the audit plan at the moment was at the time as I suppose NABCEL has been a success for the council in terms of its size of it, and it's growing. And what we were looking at there was when we had discussions with officers, I suppose at the beginning of the calendar year, it was, has NABCEL got to a certain size now that under accounting standards, you're required to consolidate it. So in other words, you need to bring it in and you have group accounts within the financial statements. As Nick said earlier, this was drafted at a point in time, and we have been looking more closely at transactions, but about 80 or 90% of the transactions with NABCEL are between the council and NABCEL itself. So actually, if you looked at that in respect of if you then consolidated it within financial statements of the council, would you see a significant difference? Probably not. Now, we're still looking at the paper that Craig and the finance team have produced to see if we agree with that. So a proposal, actually one thing Nick will take you through is, at the moment, we're unlikely to see consolidation. Well, we haven't seen consolidation this year on the basis of materiality, but we are still going through that paper. But I do take on, we are acutely aware of other companies, not so much NABCEL, if you look outside in other areas which are facing difficulties, mainly if you look at energy companies, elements like that. So yes, we do look closely at relationships that for local authority trading companies, and NABCEL won't be any different to that. But we will look about that in terms of looking at and building it into our going concern considerations. So I would maybe stop there, and Nick can take you through the maybe, and then I'm going to pick up BFM towards the end of the plan.
Nicola, did you want to come back?
Yes, please. Thanks, Chair. So I was just sort of going to take you through a few salient points in the plan, really. Although Grant has stolen a bit of my thunder, but there's some other parts I want to talk to you about. I mean, first thing to say is that this document is slightly different to the one we'd originally planned to present to you in March, because subsequent to our audit plan being agreed with management, events led us to update our planning risk assessment, reconsider our audit and value for money approach to reflect the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this document that you see before you today incorporates what we had in our original plan, plus the additional risk we then identified in relation to COVID. So as Grant said, I'll talk you through sort of the financial statements element of it, and then I'll pass back to Grant to cover off the value for money conclusion side of our work. So when we're putting our plan together, we take what we know about the business of the council, including, for example, how it controls and monitors risk, which is what we saw in the previous agenda item, any pertinent external factors, such as COVID, for instance, and design an audit programme to ensure we're focusing in on those areas which have the biggest risk to lead to a material misstatement in the financial statements. And on pages 61 to 63, having gone through that assessment, we set out the risks that we've identified. Now, it's important to say we still do work on other material balances, but these are the areas where we will expend more significant audit effort. Now, Grant mentioned their reference to NABCEL and potential group accounts, and you can see on those pages where we've got those risks set out, there is a reference to group or authority or both, and that's because, as Grant says, when this was written, we were thinking that there may be group accounts that are required to be produced, so therefore we set out our audit plan pending the conclusion of whether those group accounts were required or not. We set out a plan that would enable us to do either, basically. So if group accounts were done, these are the risks that would be needed, and if it was just the authority, then it's just the authority one. So that's what that column refers to. In terms of the significant risks themselves, there are two presumed risks in all audits. One is that there is improper revenue recognition, and the other is the risk of management override of controls. So we set out on page 61 what we've done about these risks and how we set out to mitigate them. In terms of revenue recognition, we have determined that we can rebut that risk because of the reasons set out there. For management override of controls, we're unable to rebut that risk. So there's a series of steps that we've designed to help us mitigate those risks. And that's essentially looking at any areas of the accounts where management can effectively do some jiggery-pokery, if you like, to move things around the accounts. So typically we'll focus on journals, because that's how money gets moved around the accounts. We'll have a focus on any estimates that are being made to ensure that they're justifiable and there's appropriate rationale, and there's no evidence of management bias. And we'll come on to some specific estimates that we're going to look at shortly. As I mentioned earlier, you'll see that we've put COVID as a significant risk. Now, this is to recognise not only the logistical impact of carrying out the audit and us all being remote from one another, which is sort of unusual, but also for the additional considerations that will be made for the financial statements themselves. So in terms of financial sustainability and use of reserves, where going forward you're looking at potentially reduced income, while also seeing increased demand from service recipients, and also to recognise the general uncertainty that it brings. So you might be looking at your bad debt provisions from a slightly different point of view, because there are sort of more uncertainty about the levels of debt, for instance, that might be recoverable compared to any sort of other normal year. So as we talked about earlier, many areas involve management's judgments and assumptions, and where those judgments are particularly significant or involve estimation uncertainty, then they'll draw increased scrutiny from us. That goes back to what Grant was saying about sort of our regulators' expectations of us as well, in terms of applying that increased scrutiny and challenge. So to that end, one of those assumptions we've assigned a significant risk to is the valuation of the net pension liability. This is a material figure, many more times materiality, driven by a whole host of different estimates and assumptions, small changes in which can have a really big impact. And therefore, we're going to apply heightened audit focus here. Management have engaged their own expert, an actuary, to assist them with their valuation. And we also ask questions of the pension fund auditor to help us in our challenge, and also liaise with the actuary. So it's a very involved process, which serves to ensure that the estimates and assumptions that are being applied there are not unreasonable. And the other significant risk, which again is driven by judgment, assumptions and estimates, is the valuation of land and buildings. Again, another value which is many more times materiality. You have your own experts, you get your valuers in to help you with that. And again, for us, as Grant indicated earlier on, it's not just about kicking the tires to make sure that these assumptions are right. It's looking under the bonnet and really giving it a good prod and making sure that the any assumptions that have been applied have got some appropriate rationale and justification to back those up. The last thing I was going to mention was materiality, because I've mentioned it a few times in terms of how it drives our audit, and the detail behind that is set out on page 66. Materiality is not a science; it's determined, so it's a bit of an art, but we have determined it to be 1.5 million, which is consistent with prior year. And basically what that's saying is we think that for a user of the accounts, misstatements or omissions are considered to be material if they individually or cumulatively could influence the economic decisions of users looking at your financial statements. So that's the figure we've determined. There are then other thresholds that come out of that figure. So you'll notice a little bit further down that page, we reference a figure of 75,000, and that's what we call our trivial amount. When you get our audit findings report later on in the year, that will include any issues we've identified that are above that threshold. So that's just the relevance of pointing that out there for you. And at that point, I will stop and hand over to Grant to talk through value for money.
Thanks, Nick. Just brief. So I'm taking you on to the next page, which is page 67, in terms of value for money. I think some of the wording here, as I say, was written at a point in time in respect of value for money. I think taking a step back, the key risk still remains, and it is in relation to, I suppose, from our perspective, the medium-term financial position of the council and its sustainability. I think what else had changed here is some of those elements within that, i.e. your draft accounts are out now, and you know, the deficit position was around about £300,000, slightly different to where it was when we were writing this back in February, March. But the plan is still there. I think what we did look at, does COVID change this? And I think the answer is no. We know that yourselves, like councils, are still dealing, are still trying to work through the financial implications of that. Clearly, being a district council, your income streams have been significantly impacted through loss of car parking income, leisure, etc. And as highlighted was in here, you're picking up those additional costs around homelessness, etc. So we're cognizant that there is great pressure within the sector. So I suppose overall, that's where our value for money risk would lie. I need to be slightly, in these packages, we are looking at arrangements in 1920, but and we don't. I mean, whilst we do look into 2021. That's not our primary focus when we're looking at BFM, because I think, as members said earlier, audit is primarily retrospective. But I think we would be, as part of our audit role, I think we do need to look forward this year in terms of the challenges you've got. But clearly, this is a moving environment in the sense of the support the government is providing, both to the public sector as a whole and specifically, is changing. You've had some support. They've recently, a few weeks ago, recognised that they were going to give hopefully some support around income losses. And as part of our work, we'll be talking to officers as they work their way through what those implications are and the impact on the medium-term financial strategy, etc. So I think some of the wording in here, like the business reset, we know is likely to be pushed back or has been pushed back. So whilst some of those wording things might change, we don't think the overall risk has changed, and therefore we will be concentrating on sort of financial sustainability of the council as being our overall value for money risk. So I was going to stop in terms of that. And I suppose finally, the final point to bring out is, as was mentioned earlier, in terms of fee variations and raising the bar, we have highlighted there what is changing. I've already sort of gone through elements around the change in regularity and the pressures that all audit firms are under. What we've been trying to do as a firm is balance those potential fee increases, and there is a process to go through. I will talk to Simone as lead on that, but then also PSAA have a part in looking at those fees, and then I suppose it's not quite a moderation, but looking at see if they're reasonable across the sector as a whole. So as a firm, we have been in discussions with PSAA as well as on a local basis, and there's a process to be gone through in relation to these fee scales. And I say, as a firm, we are trying to balance these in terms of recognising in the public sector the cost of the public sector, whilst raising the challenges that we need to do to meet the raising the bar challenges and specific tasks that we have to do on those specific risks. The one there clearly we need to keep a look on this year is new standards. IFRS 16 was due to come in this year. It's been deferred into to 21-22. So level of work we will need to do of that may be slightly less, or will be slightly less, but there will be some minimal disclosure requirements. But overall, just putting it out there as where we are at the moment in terms of our proposed fees. And the final bits around our independence, the other pieces of work we do for you are your housing subsidy claim and your pooled capital receipts claim. But happy to take questions.
Okay, thanks. Does anyone have any points they wish to raise on this particular item? Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question is to Grant. I know that you made reference a few minutes ago to the Financial Reporting Council. I read an article in the Financial Times around, it must have been 2 or 3 weeks ago, about Grant Thornton, where it branded, as in the council branded the quality of your audits as unacceptable and very poor, and it estimates that 45% of Grant Thornton's audits require improvement. And I just wondered what the organisation's response was to the FT article. Were they talking specifically about local government audits or just audits more generally? That's my question.
For you, Chair. Yeah, that article. I mean, clearly, I think maybe the wording that was used, I think we would disagree with. That article is based upon findings from our commercial colleagues, not our public sector colleagues. That report actually, the FRC have just finished their work on looking at, I think, 5 of our local government audits this year. So hopefully that report will be coming out in the near future. As a firm, however, I mean, I think we do recognise that there are there's some improvements for us to be made. I think in the FRC report, it has noted that we are making progress as a firm. I don't think any firm has come out with flying colours per se. We've invested heavily. Fiona Baldwin is now leading up our audit practice overall, which covers both commercial and public sector. We've invested heavily in training for our teams, so we are addressing that. It's just that, I mean, this will take the nature of the reviews 1 or 2 years to feed through. But as I said earlier, in the public sector, generally the FRC scores overall and the quality scores have been overall better, but it's not something that we take lightly. And what I'm happy to drop a note to Simone and things like that around a bit more detail that they can then be shared with members, if that would be helpful.
Grant, thank you. I appreciate that wasn't, the question wasn't particularly an item under this agenda item, but I am grateful to you for responding and also for offering that you will give a note to Simone that she can circulate to members. So thank you very much. I don't have any further speakers on that, so we can move forward. But before I do that, can I thank Grant and Nicola for coming along this evening to the meeting, and I will extend my usual invitation that they are more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if they would like to. I can fully understand why they don't always take up that option. So thank you both again.
We will be taking it up this. Well, I'll be taking it up this time, Councillor. So.
Me too.
Right. Moving on to item 9, the audit and Pick it up. The Audit and Standards Committee core work programme. This is Linda and Philip. Linda, did you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll start. This is the core work programme for this committee, so it sets out the key reports that this committee receives on an annual basis. Other reports may be presented as required throughout the year. The first 2 pages, on pages 76 and 77, set out the audit related papers that will be presented, and the following 2 pages set out the standards related papers. They are, as I said, reports that you will receive annually. I think the only difference this year, because of COVID, some of the reports will be presented at a later date than normal, such as the statement of accounts. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Philip?
Philip?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I muted myself and unmuted myself and then muted myself again, so sorry about that. The only other thing to point out, Chair, is the outcome report on pages 80-81. That's appendix B to the report, which shows that there were a number of items that were not achieved during the course of the year. What we've tried to do is incorporate those into the programme to be brought forward into the current year, so that we can play a little bit of catch up. There have been, as you'll note from the agenda, some developments in terms of the position on the Code of Conduct, which Wahid is going to talk to later, which do have implications for other aspects of the programme. So we're trying to get those into a sequence that flows. But apart from that, Chair, nothing further to add.
Okay, thank you. Any member wish to speak? No? Sorry, Councillor Evans.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a friendly, I wouldn't call it an amendment as such, but on the standards work programme on page 79, you'll see at the bottom that there's a review of petition scheme, which is expected to go to the committee on the 16th of March. Well, that's something that was meant to be reviewed in the last municipal year, but wasn't, and it was meant to be discussed at the meetings of the Constitution Review Working Party, which were never actually called. So could I move that, actually, given the urgency of this matter, it's something that really does need to be reviewed, because we are very far behind in terms of our petition scheme in comparison to other councils. So I'd like to possibly recommend that we move that to the 8th of September.
I hear that you want to move that recommendation, but before I ask for a seconder, I need to check if it is possible to actually, within the time frame, to get that review under place for the 8th of September. Mr. Richardson.
Well, I guess, Chair, that will depend on you as Chair of the Constitution Review Working Party in terms of whether we can get some meetings organised. I suspect 8th of September is probably a little ambitious, given that we would need to have an initial meeting to establish, if you like, the parameters of what the Working Party would like to look at. It may require some going away and doing some background research and preparing a report and bringing it back, and there may even be further discussions. So given the time frame that we're talking about, I suspect 8th of September is challenging, if not impossible. And I just wanted to add one point, Chair, and that is that currently under our revised procedure rules, we are not taking petitions at the moment. They are the petition scheme is effectively suspended whilst we're having virtual meetings. So I don't think it will cause undue harm to anybody's interests if it's delayed. I guess realistically November would be the earliest that we could achieve if pushed, and that does assume that we're in a position to get members together at least a couple of times in that time. I'm excluding August to a certain extent because, of course, member availability, given that we try and keep that as a fallow month for committee for the committee cycle. So I'm assuming September, October being the sort of critical period in which we would get the work done. If that's the case, then potentially we ought to be able to get something to November.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. One of the points I intended to make when I answered Councillor Evans' question later in the agenda was that, and I will answer your point later in the agenda, Councillor Evans, was that I intend to, after tonight's meeting, ask officers to try and, for the very same reasons Mr. Richardson has said, because you know, the lockdown has been relaxed. Lots of people may be going off for a few days or a week or whatever on holiday, but I have asked that they try and they find out from individual members of the working party exactly their availability, and as soon as we are aware of their availability, then I will call a meeting of the Constitution Working Party. That was part of my response to your question, and I will say it again later in the meeting. And bearing in mind what Mr. Richardson has just said, I doubt very much if we would be able to get the report that you would wish for on that, and the fact that currently we don't know when the remote working will stop, so we don't know when petitions might even be brought back as an item. So I'd rather we took the advice of Mr. Richardson and said that it would be a better idea to have the report in November. So hopefully you're reasonably happy with that, Councillor Evans. Okay, right, thank you for that.
Okay. Well, I have moved a recommendation, but okay, fine.
Well, if you wish to move the recommendation, is there a seconder for the recommendation that we have the report at the September meeting?
Can I speak or not?
Is there a seconder?
Chair, if you just briefly allow, I was going to say I'm happy to remove the recommendation on the grounds that it does go to the meeting on the 3rd of November.
Okay, sorry I misheard what you said, Councillor Evans. Well, if you're happy with that, then we will certainly make sure it goes to the meeting, to the November meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you. So,
Chair, I did have my hand raised on this item.
Oh, I haven't got, it hasn't shown up on my machine. Carry on, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. With your permission, I did really want to say that Councillor Evans' suggestion that we bring this forward does have considerable merit, because especially during this period where we are having virtual meetings and the public are not in a position to go around door to door and get paper petitions, if we as a council review our petition scheme and allow e-petitions, for example, they're still continuing in Parliament and other places, so they haven't been suspended, and we could actually get something in and working in this council that allows the public to take part in local democracy in a way that's now prevented because we're not accepting paper petitions, and quite frankly they're not really in a position to go around with them door to door and get them. So I would very much support bringing this to the 3rd of November, and I'm really pleased to say that we're now going ahead with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Right, if we could move to the recommendation that the Audit and Standards Committee Core Work Programme for 2020-21 at Appendix A be approved, and 2.2, and that will of course include moving that particular item to November, and that the progress on the 2019-20 Annual Work Programme Standards section at Appendix B we noted. Is that agreed? I see no dissent, so that is carried. Thank you very much. So we will move to agenda item 10, and I am aware that Councillor Condacor wants to speak, but do you want to present the report to start with, Linda, please?
Yes, Chair, of course I will. Yeah, this is my annual report, and within this report I am required to report to this committee and provide you with a statement on our conformance with those the public sector internal audit standards. I'm also required to give you the results of the quality assurance and improvement programme that we have in place. I'm also required to provide an overall opinion on the adequacy of the Council's control environment and provide you with a summary of the work that supports that opinion. So at section 5 of the report on page 88, I have provided you with just a summary of the standards, just for information. On page 90 in section 6, conformance with the standards, we did have an external assessment last year, and the overall conclusion of that review was that internal audit complies with the standards and provides an effective and efficient service. They did produce a small action plan, but that was just for added value rather than because we didn't comply with the standards. In section 7, regarding the quality assurance improvement programme, there are 3 areas, 3 factors that we look at here. That's the proportion of the planned audits that we completed during the year, the extent to which management adopt our recommendations, and feedback from managers on the value and performance of the audit. During last year, we did have a number of unplanned reviews and investigations which did have an impact on our completion of the approved plan, but we did complete 75% of the plan. Feedback from management generally was either good or very good, and they all felt that the recommendations we made would lead to improvements in their performance. On the opinion over the page at the end on page 92, based on the results of all the work that we've undertaken, I've given a satisfactory assurance on the control environment, and then you'll find from page 93 to page 103 a summary of those findings that support that opinion. Where we have given limited assurance, where possible, I have tried to give you an update and try to get some additional information. But I have to say that the findings that I'm reporting are a snapshot of what we found at the time that we did the audit. So things may have changed since we completed the work. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take any.
Thank you, Linda. Does anyone have any questions they wish to raise?
Sorry, Councillor, you forgot me again.
Yes, could I ever forget you, Keith? Possibly. Go on, carry on.
Thank you very much, Chair. The work of internal audit is really, really important. I always read these reports with great detail. And the thing that really concerns me, which you've had to look at this year, was the independent living service. And I'm just a bit concerned about the wording at the end of that, which makes, because there's a few things in that report, like personal emergency evacuation assessments and some of the fire safety work we've had done at Red Heron Court and the Chimes. You talk about satisfactory progress has been made. What I'd actually like to know is whether all those safety issues have been sorted out in terms of the fire risk and evacuation procedures in the independent living area. The second point I want to make, which is related to health and safety, is we've just had a lot of paving work done, replacing paving with tarmac at Cleaver Gardens. And there's numerous safety issues around there, including dumping a large truck of soil right next to one of my residents' flats who's got problems with her lungs. We've got bollards being put in that cut off emergency access. And during the works, we've had both exits from some of the flats closed off due to the working area. So there's lots of health and safety issues, I think, still in the housing issue. And the final point I wanted to make in my 3 minutes was about continuity. We've just had Garmin, which is one of the biggest technological companies in the world, subject to a ransomware attack. And that behaved very differently to the sort of continuity we have when we have a fire at the town hall. You have a fire at the town hall, you use your backup servers at the civic hall. What happens in these ransomware attacks is that all your data is encrypted, and if you've got a backup site, very often that's encrypted because it's actually copying the same ransomware attack as attacking the main site. So I wanted to have an assurance that the ransomware attacks was also being looked at in terms of business continuity. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Linda, do you want to respond to Councillor Condacor before I bring in any other speakers?
The only thing I would like to say with the independent living service, I don't have the information on the individual issues that were raised, but the auditor that's completed the work was happy that the improvements have been made, and that's why they provided a revised opinion. If they weren't happy that things were improving, we wouldn't have changed our original opinion.
Thank you. Thank you. I have two speakers who have indicated. Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. When I read through this report, I saw that there were 18 separate ratings in there: satisfactory, significant, limited, all the rest of it. And I looked through these, and satisfactory, there was 10 of them, 55%. Significant, just 3 of them, 16%, and 5, 28%, well over a quarter, that only provided limited assurance. So I'm not sure about the figure of 84% that's quoted. As far as I can see, there's only kind of 72% that are satisfactory or significant assurance there. And I think we're probably, kind of being very generous on some of those. When we discussed at a previous audit meeting the housing repairs one, and the fact that, major issues about the stock orders weren't tied up with work orders, and about safety in working environments, and we've just heard from the last speaker about some of that as well. But that's still gone down as satisfactory, which seems to be, kind of looking at the glass very much half full rather than half empty. But even including that, it still looks like it's only 72% of them are falling into that category, which means that actually, when there's only 3 with significant assurance, it means that 84% of the audits fall short of what we would hope, because we would hope for significant on pretty much everything. Not perfect audits with no problems, but that there was some significant assurance there, because let's face it, the council's been doing this stuff for decades. There's nothing new here. Corporate credit cards aren't new, data isn't new, housing repairs aren't new. None of this stuff is new, yet we're getting limited assurances and far too often, and just satisfactory reports, or reports that get talked up to satisfactory when some of the problems that have been identified get partially corrected, not fully corrected. So it seems like Linda and her team are diligently going around year after year on a long cycle of telling people to sort this out or whatever and sort that out, but yet the age-old problems just keep on coming back. It's unacceptable in any commercial entity to year in, year out be having 84% of audits that fall short of what you would expect. And you have to question, if the auditors are going around doing their jobs as they are diligently according to these reports every year, what's wrong with the culture in the organisation that people don't follow the rules, don't keep records, don't protect data, safety isn't followed? I would have thought putting people safety first would be the absolute priority of the council. So I think we need to stop just looking at the headlines here and taking it all as glass half full. We need to say, given the period of time the council's been in operation and the things that it's been doing for so many years and have been audited, and proposals have been put in so many times to correct things, to have 84% of your audits not provide significant assurance, there is something clearly wrong. And I wonder whether this committee ought to be considering some kind of external review just to say, actually, why is it? What is it not in individual areas, which Linda's covering, but what is it as a culture that is happening in the organisation that is meaning that all these audits keep failing, that they're only at best satisfactory or a lot of them limited. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I ask Councillor Evans to speak, would you like to respond to that point, Linda, please?
Yes, of course I will, Chair. We are no different. It would be wonderful to have everything as significant assurance, Councillor Tromans, but we only give significant assurance if it's almost perfect and there's only very minor things that we find wrong. So if we do have to make recommendations, we would only give satisfactory assurance anyway. And people do make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, and that's what we're there for. We're to pick up people's mistakes and make sure they're rectified as much as anything else. And looking at other authorities, we are no different to any authorities. I don't know an authority that does have significant assurance across all the work that the internal audit team do. But one good thing is that when we do the follow-up reviews, we are finding that recommendations that we make are being introduced. So managers do take it seriously, the work that we do. They do listen to us and they do make improvements.
Thank you, Linda. Chair, just before you bring in the other speaker, if I might just come back on that very briefly. Actually, I think Linda makes a very good point about other local authorities. Possibly we could ask for some benchmarking to be brought to this committee that shows us typically what kind of percentage other local authorities are getting. I mean, it could be that they too have 84% that fall of their audits that fall short of what you would like. I would suspect that, you know, they're probably getting at least half of them to provide meaningful, really significant assurance. But let's get the benchmarking work done and have that brought to the committee, please.
Simone, you wish to speak?
Yeah, I'd just like to draw the committee's attention to the definitions of the assurance levels, which are on page 100, I think, of the agenda. So satisfactory assurance is basically a sound system of internal control with some minor weaknesses. And I think I'd just like to highlight as well that, as I'm sure you're all aware, the council has had its resources significantly reduced over recent years and is operating the same services that we've always had to operate on much less staff and resources. So everyone is working much harder, which sometimes, as Linda says, does mean that reaching those sort of levels of near perfection quite difficult sometimes. That was all. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Evans.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've just got a very brief point that I wish to make in relation to Linda's comments on page 98 under safeguarding, which is clearly a very important matter for the council. Yeah, I haven't got any issues with what Linda has made, but I just wondered, when looking at safeguarding and when coming to your audit opinion, do you consider the licensing department and the safeguarding training that they should be offering to our taxi drivers and private hire vehicle licensees? I note that the Secretary of State for Transport last week issued new statutory guidance, which means that by law the council will now need to provide safeguarding training for taxi drivers, and we have done that in the past, but I would say it probably hasn't been done as frequently as it probably should be done. I accept that the Secretary of State's announcement was made after this report was published, but I just wondered if that is something that you considered when looking at the safeguarding of the council.
Linda, do you want to respond? Linda? I'll call, we may have lost Linda. I'll call Councillor Brown.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having problems with the mute and unmute button. Yes, it is something that we consider, and my understanding is that all taxi drivers, when there was first the issue in Rotherham with the child sexual exploitation, all current taxi drivers were trained then, and for any new taxi drivers that come along, we don't issue the license until they've received the training, and that is a new policy that's been introduced.
Thank you. I don't have any more speakers at this showing up. Oh, sorry, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. My question regards the limited assurance about data quality, given that the quality of an organisation's data is something that its reputation can stand or fall upon. Given that we've got problems with the quality of the data, the system use, and the number of targets, and so is it your opinion then that the TENS performance management system is actually fit for purpose? And could you perhaps give us some an indication of what recommendations for improving the performance in this area were made as part of the result of the audit, please?
Thank you. Linda, do you want to respond?
Yes, Chair. We have no problems with the TEN performance system. It's generally the information that's being put onto the system rather than the system itself. What we have tried to do is look at the number of performance indicators that are on the system, because if they are being put out to the public, they have to be 100% correct. But we find that some of them are more managerial type indicators that allow managers to more effectively manage their sections. But this is we do look at data quality every year. This is something that we do look at annually. So we will be carrying out a further review shortly on this area.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. I have no further speakers, so could we move to the recommendation as printed on the report, in that we note the findings of an assessment of the internal audit function against the public sector internal audit standards and quality assurance programme, to consider the summary of internal audit work at Appendix A and B, which supports the head of audit and governance options, and that the head of audit and governance overall opinion on the control environment be noted. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
I see no dissension, so that is agreed. Thank you very much. Agenda item 11, which is the annual governance statement. I think, Simone, this is yours.
Yes, Chair, I'm going to take you through this briefly. So this report just presents the Council's annual governance statement for 2019-20, and this sets out the internal control and governance framework, and we are required to review that annually, and it then accompanies our statement of accounts, and you will receive those in September. This statement for 19-20 has already been reviewed by the management team and is accompanied by assurance statements from all of the directors and an executive director. There haven't been any major changes to the governance framework over the last 12 months, but I would just draw your attention to the action plan, which starts on page 114. That just sets out a review of the previous year's actions, and then also sets out some actions for the next 12 months, and they are monitored through the corporate governance group as well. I shall leave it there. Chair, was a very brief introduction, but obviously happy to take any questions.
I'm going to have to pause just one moment because my screen has just disappeared again.
I think
Okay.
Linda's
I'll just put it back. Thank you, Simone. Linda, you wish to speak? I have you down as wanting to speak. No,
no,
got
Chair,
your hand
no,
up,
I've
Linda.
got, I'm sorry, have I? I'm having problems with it at the moment.
I think a few of us are having problems with it at the moment. I don't have anyone wishing to speak. So we note the annual governance report. I think we note it. No, sorry. The recommendation is to consider the findings of the review of corporate governance and internal control set out the annual governance statement, AGS, Appendix A in this report. Is that agreed? Okay, I see no dissension, so that is carried. Thank you. Moving to agenda item 12. This is the Civic Hall report presented by Linda. Could you want to present this report, please?
Yeah. Yes, Chair, I will. I brought a report to this committee in January where I reported that a review of the Civic Hall was in progress, and I was asked to bring a full report on the scope of that review and the findings of that review. The review that we completed was a value for money review, and the scope is set out in section 4 of the report, and we looked at 3 key areas. That was the Legends Bar, the coffee bar, and the shows, both private and council promoted. Section 5 sets out the findings and the responses that we've received from management. Kevin Hollis, who is now the director responsible for this area, has come along to the meeting tonight to answer any questions, but I understand he is taking a report with an action plan to scrutiny a scrutiny panel in September. That's all I think I'd want to say. If there's any questions.
Thank you. I have 3 speakers. Councillor Condacor, Councillor Wilson, no, 2 speakers, sorry, and the statement from Councillor Hancock. Councillor Condacor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. For the whole of my councillor life, the Civic Hall has always been a thing discussed and a problem that needs improving. I love having a Civic Hall in terms of shows and what it can provide for the borough, but I hate the fact it burns so much money. Civic halls will always run at a loss if you count them in pure economic terms, but effectively they provide a valuable service. And like the climbing wall, if we said the climbing wall was £44 for everyone who climbs it, the Civic Hall, we should work out how much for each patron at a show the cost is, because that would actually focus the minds on providing shows that not only didn't have a large subsidy cost, but also had a very large footfall. Because one of the things is, if it costs £100,000 and you have 100,000 people through it, the subsidy is £1 per person. Well, if it costs £300,000 or £400,000 and you have 4,000 people through it, you're costing £100 per person. So we need to get footfall up and running costs down. I keep saying we need to take the bar and the cafe and things and make it run commercially. And when I do set a budget proposal, I've always said it should be run by an entrepreneur, the front of the Civic Hall. And due to COVID, we're going to have 1 or 2 years that are going to be really rough going forward. So I think, and it would have been useful to look at these recommendations, actually what we do with it. And one radical idea I think we should discuss is actually using it as a sports centre, very much like the Jubilee Centre for an interim period. It'd be great doing that in terms of helping some of the health impacts. And actually it may provide us the opportunity of actually rebuilding the better swimming pool at Leisure Centre, whilst using the quiet time in the Civic Hall while we work out what to do with it, and maybe get some new operator in and have a relaunch of the Civic Hall in a year's time or so. So I think if the opportunity was there, rather than sitting empty for the next year whilst it's very difficult to do shows, I'd love it to be used for badminton, get some exercise machines in there, and actually that would turn some bar profits as well. So I think we do need to actually take account of COVID now. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. I have Councillor Wilson down as wishing to speak, but I can't see him. Is Councillor Wilson in the meeting, Wendy?
I am here, Chair.
Oh, you are. Sorry, I can't see you on here. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. like Councillor Condacore, my time as a councillor started very much with the Civic Hall. Back in 2010, I sat in on what I was part of the Civic Hall review. And I have to say, a lot of the issues that we found in the 2010 Civic Hall review are coming up yet again in this audit review. There are, Chair, some serious, significant and sustained failings in this report. There are consistent failings to provide assurances. We have called for, and I have called for, proper investigations of the Civic Hall, but we were denied time and time again. We were told by the officers responsible and by the portfolio holder who was responsible that nothing was wrong with the Civic Hall. But clearly there is. That is in the report. These failings would not be tolerated either in the private or the public sector. I am deeply concerned, Chair, that there is a management culture that has consistently denied that there is a problem. I believe that there are some serious, significant cultural issues at the heart of the Civic Hall that have blocked these issues being investigated. I'm hoping that the departure of the previous Civic Hall manager will help to unblock some of this cultural denial. In my job, Chair, I am responsible for a number of staff and a number of buildings far greater than the Civic Hall. And if this was my performance or that of my members of staff, my performance would be called into question. And I would probably, if this was a significant and sustained period, which it is, be considered for disciplinary action. And I think this is significant and serious enough to warrant that. And I believe investigations need to take place urgently. And it isn't just me that is saying that, it is the findings of the report. No effective stock control in place, no full trading statement has been completed for some time. Why are we having informal contracts that haven't been tendered for a number of years? No full stock control being maintained, and we can't ensure that all stock is identified and investigated, any discrepancies. I used to be a personal license holder and be able to run a pub, and I know how to clean lines. Losing 30 pints per cleanage per week is ridiculous and absurd, and we should never have been in that position and lost that amount of money. We have officers deciding to change recommendations from full council in budget decisions, which is simply not on. And we have, which we were told back in 2010, when I sat on the Civic Hall Review Working Party, that prices do not cover the direct costs of the bar. We have council procedure rules being denied and not implemented for a number of years. And we have no effective risk assessment process to check the financial viability of each show. This is damning and needs further investigation and action, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Condacore, could you unmute yourself, please? Councillor Brown.
Sorry, you said unmute. You mean put flag down?
Can you mute yourself, please? Or put your hand down. That's better, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, I have Councillor Hancock's statement. Do you want me to read that out?
Sorry about that. Yes, please, yes.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a statement from Councillor Bill Hancock's. He says, as I am unable to attend this meeting, I wish to make the following statement. I'm also happy with the agreement of the Chair if it takes more than 3 minutes for members to receive it following the conclusion of the meeting. The appointment of a new director now provides the opportunity to place the Civic Hall at the heart of the Bedworth Town Centre master plan. Most cities and large towns have an anchor store that attracts other businesses and users to the area. Bedworth, due to its location, does not have this, but does have the renowned Civic Hall that attracts users locally and from a wider area. It can and should be Bedworth's anchor. However, and in my own personal opinion, it is not utilised enough. It was designed for multi-use activities, for example, the arts and community use. We have an advantageous position geographically and should be able to attract conferences, etc. This type of use could possibly lead to the development of a small to medium hotel, something that is lacking in Bedworth. Perhaps more importantly is the current operation of the bar, bistro, cafe, which has limited hours of operation. The report mentions the competition within the town centre in regard to food. I think that the right kind of provision, we should not be scared of the competition. The drinks side of the catering operation, I believe, could be a real opportunity, as there are very few drinking establishments in the town centre. Rather than just noting the report, perhaps the committee can urge a positive review of the operation of the Bar Bistro Cafe. The Bar Bistro Cafe should, in my opinion, be open from the morning until late evening, providing a use that would attract people into the town centre during and outside of traditional shopping hours. We all recognise that town centre retail uses are declining and a more leisure use approach is needed. The Civic Hall has an attractive frontage, one that could lend itself to some outside tables, parasols, etc. The report mentions removing the draft beers. Again, in my opinion, whether bottles only, draft only, or both, are not much use if you don't have customers coming through the doors. On the show night, patrons cannot currently have a drink after the show in the Civic Hall and no doubt move somewhere else. Draft beers in small sizes kegs are available on demand from local suppliers and should not result in much wastage. As I said at the start, we have a real opportunity here, and with the right vision and enthusiasm, I believe the Civic Hall could be the centre of a rejuvenated Bedworth Town Centre. Stay safe and well.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I currently have 3 speakers indicating after those, which is Councillor Brown, Councillor Croft and Councillor Sargent. After those 3 speakers have spoken, after those 3 speakers have spoken, I will ask Mr. Kevin to come back with some responses. I would then have indicated 3 further speakers, but I think it's fair that we take the responses a few at a time. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank Linda for bringing this report to us, and I don't envy the task of having to come back with a report year after year into the limp performance, to say it best, of the Civic Hall. But the report does raise a number of disturbing aspects, and I have to say I'm grateful to Linda to the responses she gave me to the questions I raised prior to this meeting that have given some context to the report. I grew up in a pub. My father was a successful pub and restaurant owner for over 35 years. I've also been the trustee of a successful local volunteer-run theatre. It doesn't make me an expert on running the Civic Hall, but it sure as hell seems to make me more of an expert than the people who've been in charge of running it managerially and politically over the last decade. I mean, there are a number of serious questions here. I mean, the informal contract in the bar with baby bottles, is this a breach of the council's contract rules? The failure to retend the contract, is that in breach? I mean, if so, why has it taken so long for this to be addressed? I mean, who was responsible at a senior level for monitoring the performance here? The decision to have 4 different draft beer lines on sale in a bar that's only open for about 100 times a year, and 24% of it literally poured down the drain because we're not selling it. We have to question who made that decision and why it wasn't challenged, and why it was allowed to go on for so long. You know, the wastage levels in cleaning the lines, as Councillor Wilson has already highlighted, they're probably at least double what you'd expect in a normal bar situation. So, you know, we've got a situation where we're not accounting for things. We haven't got records of things like what's being sold, whether the stock is being rotated correctly, but we seem to have managed to have kept accurate records of what's being wasted, somewhat bizarrely. You know, we're selling food effectively at a loss. Now, I can accept the Civic Hall, the theatre operation, some of the shows, they're not going to make a profit, and there's got to be some small subsidy of the arts in there. But the Civic Hall is not in business to sell food at a loss. That's not part of its remit. It's not in business to run a bar at a loss, and it's wrong to expect council taxpayers to subsidise the meals and the drinks at the Civic Hall due to poor management. The failure to choose a good contract and investigate alternative suppliers. You know, we've got so many things here that are wrong and that have been left unchallenged for so long, and that is why this report is so valuable. I noticed that we're asked to note the findings of the review and the actions agreed by management. And I accept that Kevin's going to bring a report to us on this later, but they were not in this report that we've seen. So we have no idea what the proposed actions by management are. I mean, the failure to keep appropriate records highlighted at clauses 5.3, 5.5, 5.10, 5.11. Do this not place the council at risk of fraud? I mean, we've just had a fraud report. None of this was mentioned. So I think there are some real serious concerns here, and I'll be interested to hear what Kevin is coming forward with his response and his action plan, because clearly he could well be a new broom in here. But this has gone on for a real long time, and it needs looking at in a very serious way, and we need to consider seriously whether the council is the best placed organisation to manage the Civic Hall. Now, I say manage, I'm not talking about selling off the Civic Hall or anything like that. Let's make that very, very clear. But they may not be the best people to manage the running of this operation. We could well do with some experts in running a theatre or running a bar or running a cafe, or a charitable trust possibly. We need to look at all of these options, to make sure we get the Civic Hall back into the sort of thing it should be. I've been helped out behind the scenes there at the Civic Hall in shows. I know that a number of the community-led shows no longer go there. The pricing structure at the Civic Hall is all wrong. It's pricing itself against the wrong alternative theatres. It's driven away the community-based shows. So a couple that I'm personally aware of, the Gang Show now goes to the Abbey Theatre, like most of the community-led shows. It's cheaper. These small organisations cannot afford to take the risk of hiring the Civic Hall and not making a profit on their show if they can't sell the tickets at the price that covers their costs. There are other local theatres. They're much more competitively priced. We need to be looking at them and pricing ourselves accordingly. The major ballroom dance competition that used to take part there, I've taken part in it myself. Now at Walsall Town Hall, again, the organiser could not afford to take the risk of booking the Civic Hall and not breaking even. The backstage is so out of date. Actually, you look at the whole Civic Hall. It's like the worst aspects of Phoenix Night, except whereas Phoenix Night it was a comedy and very brilliant comedy, this is a complete tragedy. So I think we need to have a real good look at this, and let's look at whether we are the best placed people to be running it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I intend to call Councillors Croft and Sargent, but I would like to remind members this is the Audit Committee. It is not a Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Croft.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to raise a couple of points about process that have been highlighted by the audit. First of all, in 5.8. Now, 5.8 details how the council's management team decided to change the offer after the budget was set by council and cabinet. Now, as I understand the process, at this council, the cabinet and the council are the budget holders. They control the budget. And in a business, if you set a budget, you wouldn't deviate from it without going back to the budget holder. In my career, for example, if the financial controller told me buy X and I went ahead off my own bat and bought Y, I would be in very serious trouble. So I'd quite like to know why because the way it reads to me is that we've got management override of the process there without democratic oversight, and it is a member-led authority. So my questions on that are, why was that decision taken? And I can't see anything in the management response about how that's going to be changed in the plan moving forward. So I appreciate that you do have powers, officer emergency powers, like we've been using lately, but a bit of feedback is not an emergency, as I read that section of the report. The other point I wanted to make was in 5.12, which is about budget control, because it says here that budgets are effectively managed because of the regular meetings of the finance team. But could we have a bit of explanation as to that, as to what the audit found? Because again, if you've budgeted for a £3,000 profit on the coffee bar and you've come out with a £17,000 loss and you're 20 grand out, we would reassess the strategy and the budget. So could I have some explanation as to what that entails? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Croft. Councillor Sargent, please.
Yeah, similar sort of question really. It's, you know, the civic hall's been raised several times, as I remember, through full council, and the figures that we've got, the report we've got here, really, you know, if this was my business, I'd be, you know, I'd be crying now, because I'd be thinking, blimey, you know, it's not good. So really, I just want to know, you know, why aren't these figures being challenged internally? And, you know, the procurement process where we've, you know, supposedly have to go out and get prices and quotes. It just hasn't happened. I mean, it's a calamity in a sense, isn't it? Because I just feel it's quite damning, really, on the management of the civic hall. But what I'd like to know is why, you know, why hasn't there been any more better decisions made, if you like, to stop this happening?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Sargent. I had planned to just have those three speakers. I have one further speaker before I bring Kevin in. Councillor Evans.
Chair, is it possible to hear from Kevin first? Because depending on response from Kevin, it might decide whether or not I want to ask a question on my list, which is a long list, to be fair.
It is your wish, Councillor Evans, but I may not bring Kevin back in again if after you've spoken. Kevin, would you like to answer the points that have been raised?
Thank you, Chair. I will do my best. As you mentioned at the start, I only took over the responsibility from the Civic Hall from January, and obviously took a couple of months to get to understand what was going on at the Civic Hall. So what I really wanted to update the committee on was the things that have been put in place since sort of February. So first of all, the draft bar, we are looking to remove the T-bars, the bar pools from the downstairs bar over the next couple of weeks. We've contacted the brewery, and we recognise that in terms of the pipe cleaning and the wastage, that's not good use in terms of that bar. So we will be moving to a bottle bar. That will be on the basis that if we have any future shows, darts competitions that require and request a draft bar, and the income from that generated will offset those costs, we would look to bring a temporary draft bar in place, which is a very reasonably priced and will be part of the overall higher cost. In terms of the procurement, there's a procurement exercise underway for food and beverages, and that's already been started, and that's in place working with our procurement team. So we will be undertaking that, and we'll have that done as per the timescales that are in the report. I'm hoping to have that done sooner so that we have all that in place, and that obviously then supports the stock control, the cost, the profit element, and the margins. Now, those are all in place. I've been working with finance since I took over, and those are in place with our finance business partner and also Jackie Ollerenshaw that I've been working with. So we have those in place. There is currently being undertaken, along with the procurement, a full review of the menu. For the menu for the cafe area has been reduced, and that is a lot less than it previously has. That is being recosted up, and that will then be recosted up against the procurement exercise that previously they have been using bookers. I can't answer as to why that previously hasn't been procured, but that is underway now. So both of those are away. In terms of shows, there has been some risk management undertaken with the team. So we now do a full review of any hires that come in. So the risk is reduced on the local authority. Yes, there is a pricing structure in place that will need to be looked at going forward. And I do take on board some of the comments that have been raised tonight about there is a feel that we outprice some of the community events. I think there's a balance there between council promoted shows and private hires that we have to get right. I think the risk for the authority is if the council promoted shows, there is obviously, and has been before, an element of loss of income there. So we do need to monitor and manage that. But the team now have a process in place that we don't take any hires unless we've done any research and found out what are those hires and where they've performed before. We've also improved and will be putting in place upon opening more contactless payment. We've previously had the site a lot of cash payment, but we'll be moving, obviously with the current climate as well, that contactless payment will be pushed in all those areas. I think I've put a number of changes in place. Obviously, we've been frustrated with COVID, but just to answer a couple of points that that Keith mentioned earlier, we do have bookings in place that are looking to commence in October onwards. Yes, that will be social distancing, that will be no food and beverage, and we will be looking at those measures in place. But we've already got 2 or 3 hires looking to use the facility as soon as possible, whether that be October. The team have done a really good job in moving all the bookings from this year to next year. So the calendar for next year's bookings, and fingers crossed, we're obviously in a position to deliver that. And there will be some constraints regarding social distancing if we need to look at that going forward. And those numbers have already been looked at as to what we can cope with and what we can't. But we do have a full calendar based upon the shows that have been rebooked from last year to next year forthcoming. Other work has gone on at the site in terms of repairs, maintenance, deep clean, and just really we're just looking forward to getting back open to provide the facility to the local community and wider. So I take on board some of the comments. A number of those I hope I've already addressed in terms of the areas in section 5 of the report, but I do appreciate there are a number of other areas to look at moving forward. But I think some of those that have been reoccurred before have now been addressed and will be upon us reopening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. My people isn't working very well. Simone, did I see your hand appear earlier because you seem to have disappeared?
Right, okay. I did indicate earlier, actually. It was just to draw. I think there was a comment that the report didn't contain any management actions. I just wanted to draw attention to page 5.12 and 5.13, which do have some management actions. But obviously, Kevin has covered those in much more detail now anyway.
Yeah, I thought I'd spotted your hand at some point. I have 2 further speakers, Councillor Evans and Councillor Tromans. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we're not a scrutiny panel. You're absolutely right. But, you know, let's be honest, it's the job of a councillor to scrutinise the financial operation of this council. And I don't really know where to begin. I mean, okay, so first of all, 5.8 makes reference to a petition. I'd like the assurance from an officer that the petition that was submitted to the council was in accordance with the council's petition scheme, because my recollection from the time was that petition was an online petition. And as you all know, Chair, as the Chair of the Constitution Review Working Party, we've banned people from using online petitions. So I'd like the assurance that the petition that the management received was in accordance with the council's petition scheme. And secondly, I'm going to repeat the question that Councillor Croft raised, because it's a very, very important question. Again, on 5.8, it says that the management team agreed to change the menus as a result of the petition. That's changing the council's budget. So I want to know, was that basically just a decision to override the decision made by full council and cabinet? Because, you know, discussing this with Councillor Wilson, when he's wanted to make slight amendments to the budget in the past, that has to go to full council. in this case, it hasn't. So I'd like some clarity on that. I'd like to know, was that actually a decision to override full council? Because we've lost £17,000 here, and I think it's only right that a councillor questions that if it's been printed in the report. 5.10, you know, it refers to the Civic Hall breaching the council's contract procedure rules, and I'd like to know how that was allowed to happen. What oversight was given at the time to ensure that that wouldn't happen? I'd like an answer as to what oversight was in place at the time to ensure that didn't happen, because it clearly happened if it's been highlighted in this audit report. Yeah, it's great that Kevin is putting a report to scrutiny at the next opportunity, and I welcome that report. But you know, as I said at full council, we have a culture here where the scrutiny panels don't actually achieve much. We just note reports. So I don't know what a report to the internal OSP regarding the Civic Hall would actually achieve in hindsight. I'd like some clarity on 5.4. I mean, we're a public sector organisation. Why are we? What is an informal contract? You know, we're a public sector organisation. This should not be happening. And you know, the report as well, you know, makes reference to the coffee bar. You know, the reality is that if the coffee bar was tendered out, as we have done with the cafe at the museum in the Neaton, the bar would have been able to access the job retention scheme, business grants, all that which it hasn't been able to access. And my other question is as well today, I'd like to know why the Legends Bar and the Coffee Bar has not signed up to the government's Eat Out to Help Out scheme, because there's hundreds of businesses in the Neaton and Bedworth cafes, restaurants which have signed up to it. Civic Hall hasn't. Why? I'd like to know an answer to that. But you know, in light of what's included within this report, I think we're past the stage now of internal scrutiny, and we need to bring someone in as soon as possible to look at the operation of the Civic Hall. So I'd like to move a recommendation to the committee. So I'd like to move the following. Below recommendation 2.1, we insert the following recommendations. This committee is seriously concerned that the Bedworth Civic Hall has shown a consistent inability to operate within an approved budget over consecutive financial years. Therefore, this committee resolves to recommend to full council that it adopts the following motion. This council resolves to procure the services of an independent external auditor to conduct a detailed review into the financial operation and management of the Bedworth Civic Hall, with the view to improving value for money and service delivery to residents. The funding for the external audit shall be taken from the unallocated general reserves (brackets general fund). Recommendation 2.3. An extraordinary meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee be called to discuss the financial operation and management of the Civic Hall following the findings of the external auditor. Recommendation 2.4. As a result of the limited assurance ruling from the head of Audit and Governance, this committee triggers Article 4E.13 (brackets A) of the Council's Constitution, and therefore requires the portfolio holder for Arts and Leisure, the Director for Leisure, Recreation and Health, the Director for Democracy, Planning and Public Protection, and senior officers at the Bedworth Civic Hall to sit in front of the committee at its extraordinary meeting. And I'll copy and paste those recommendations into the to the chat. But I formally propose those because we're now we're past the stage of internal audits and scrutiny. We need to bring in external people now.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Tromans. Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Evans has attempted to do, I'd like to bring this back to the actual audit report that's in front of us. And I appreciate the comments by others and by the officers about the future of the Civic Hall and all the rest of it, but they're discussions for another day. I'd like to bring us back to this, and the statements that were read out that made me smile, that talk about the future again for the Civic Hall and make all sorts of suggestions, the very suggestions that the individual has been resisting for the last 10 years, again, doesn't really help us. So we need to look at this report. We need to look at items 5.7, 5.8, 5.9 and onwards. What I'm reading here, and what it seems to be coming out from what's been discussed today, is that despite the decision made by full council, management on the ground decided to change things, and as a result, a profit of 3,100 that was expected from a reduced service ended up being a loss of 17,000. So in other words, £20,100 worse off. And that the only thing that seems to have changed, according to the audit report, is that rather than offering a very limited service, they expanded it to sandwiches, paninis, jacket potatoes. Well, at the wholesale cost, £20,100 worth would literally be a small hill, 20, 30 foot high of sandwiches and cakes and jacket potatoes. Can I ask Linda to explain? Is that plausible? Is that feasible? Are the bins at the Civic Hall even big enough to have contained such colossal wastage? Or did she explore any other potential explanations for why over £20,000 worth of stock just obviously spoiled and got thrown away because it clearly wasn't sold? The other item about the stock takes, again, it's just the fact that the value retail of what's in a cupboard balances with what should be there, but yet is probably not the same stuff as actually should be there, has just been skimmed over. And this is why I think Councillor Evans and others are right. We need to get an external audit in to have a good look at what's been going on there. And perhaps Linda can, or one of the other officers can, when addressing what's happened to this huge mountain of food that's been wasted, can also talk about what investigations have been done and what disciplinary employees, management particularly, have faced as part of this, because that seems to be the other thing that's missing from this audit report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tremens. Councillor Evans, you have put some words on the meeting chat, and for whatever reason, I'm only seeing half of what you have written.
Chair, you have to click on see more.
Wendy, have you got all of those? Because I'm not getting all of them as it's written.
I think so, Chair, yes.
Okay. So I'll move back to you, Wendy, to read them out again when the time is right. Councillor Tromans, did I hear you second Councillor Evans' proposal?
Happy to do so.
Yes, you did. Thank you. I thought so. I have been advised that as this is an executive function, that the item should go to Cabinet and not Council. So perhaps you might want to consider that legal advice. Moving back to speakers, if it will. Sorry, just one moment.
I think you've got Councillor Longden, Chair, indicating.
Councillor Longden. Yeah, it's popped back up again now. Councillor Longden.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak on this, but until all this nonsense came up, I don't know if you don't listen or what, but you heard Kevin say that he got a grip of these things. He's been doing some of the work, and there's going to be a review in September. And now you want this other meeting to do all this other stuff. Why can't you just wait until September, get the review out of the way, and find out then, or check then to see if there's anything that needs to be looked at? Quite frankly, it's ridiculous. And it's the same old story, isn't it? It's been going around for years that you just don't like the Civic Hall. The Conservatives, the Independents and the Greens don't like the Civic Hall, and they're putting pounds before people and the performing arts again. That's what it's all about. You just want to do away with it, sell it off to some developer, or just privatise it. And quite frankly, it's not making any impression on me at all. And I don't know why you want to go down this route, other than the fact that you just want to make this point and try and score a few political points along the way. And that's all you're trying to do. You're not even bothered about the Civic Hall or the residents of this borough. Frankly, you just got to wait now for this review in September and see where it goes. I think we should put the vote, Chair, but obviously not going to at this point.
Thank you. I'm not going to allow you to speak again, Councillor Brown, because you spoke at length.
Chair, I just want to come back on something Councillor Longton has just said. None of us have mentioned selling off the Civic Hall. None of us have said that. He's a liar and it's wrong. He needs to apologise. Thank you.
Councillor Brown, I am speaking. If you'd have listened, you'd have heard me. You say you want to come back on something that Councillor Longton has said. Well, I'm sorry, you had a long speech early in this meeting. We have had 8 else 9 speakers, and I am not going to allow you to come back a second time.
Thank you, Chair.
We have a proposal from Councillor Evans, seconded by Councillor Tromans. I will be moving an amendment to that proposal, but Wendy, could you tell us in detail what the proposal was, please?
Yes, Chair. So Councillor Evans moved that this committee is seriously concerned that the Bedworth Civic Hall has shown a consistent inability to operate within an approved budget over consecutive financial years. Therefore, this committee resolves to recommend to full council that it adopts the following motion. This council resolves to procure the services of an independent external auditor to conduct a detailed review into the financial operation and management of the Bedworth Civic Hall, with the view to improving value for money and service delivery to residents. The funding for the external audit shall be taken from the unallocated general reserves (general fund). 2.3. An extraordinary meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee be called to discuss the financial operation and management of the Civic Hall following the findings of the external auditor. 2.4. As a result of the limited assurance ruling from the Head of Audit and Governance, this committee triggers Article 4E 13A of the Council's Constitution and therefore requires the portfolio holder for Arts and Leisure, Director for Leisure, Recreation and Health, Director for Democracy, Planning and Public Protection and senior officers at the Bedworth Civic Hall to sit in front of the committee at its extraordinary meeting.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm going to move an amendment to that proposal, and that is that we note the findings of this review and the actions agreed by management, and that the points raised at this meeting be part of the report going to the September overview and scrutiny panel.
Point of order.
What is your point of order, Councillor Evans?
Yeah, my point of order is in relation to the council's constitution, and you may need to take some legal advice regarding this, but your amendment quite clearly negates the 3 recommendations which have been inserted into the chat group. I don't think that anyone can deny that clearly negates the original recommendations. If that's your ruling, you know, I think it's a very, very, very sticky wicket that you're on, Councillor Tandy, and could be open to legal action possibly. But, you know,
Councillor Evans, please do not threaten me with legal action.
I'm not.
In this meeting, Councillor Evans, I am speaking. It is my view that I have not negated the original proposal. I have simply added to the recommendation. Mr. Richardson, could you give your legal view, please?
Yes, Chair. I mean, clearly negating would just be by adding a not in front of the motion, so that instead of doing something, you're not doing something. The Constitution says that an amendment is to delete words and add words, or a combination of the two. It's entirely a matter for you, Chair. It's your discretion as Chair. But clearly, if all you're doing is taking words out and adding words in, and not adding not in, then that would be perfectly acceptable, Chair.
Thank you. So my amendment remains on the my decision. Councillor Tromans, I assume you wish to speak to the amendment.
Yes, indeed, Chair. Thank you very much. I'm astonished. I am, because I couldn't have believed I would have heard Director Richardson say that. I've heard him say many times about such amendments in the council chamber that it's not just simply a question of putting the word not or no in front. It's the meaning and sense. And what Councillor Evans was seeking to do was to have an external audit report done and to have an extraordinary meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee, and all of that is being negated. So, but we can't really have any pretense. It is a negation of that, and so I couldn't possibly support it. And I wonder if there ought to be a pause and people ought to just reflect on what's been said and just issue some further clarification. I appreciate, Chair, you can decide whatever you want, but I'm not sure that necessarily makes it constitutional or legal. And I think Director Richardson maybe only half finished what he meant to say. I'm sure he meant to add that if the sense of an amendment is to negate the original motion, then that is effectively the same thing. But I'll leave it to you.
Councillor Tromans, I was well aware of the response that Mr. Richardson gave, and I made my decision based on some of the comments he made. Councillor Brown, you wish to speak?
Chair, thank you. Given that you've proposed an amendment, I think at the very least you need to put it into chat so we can now read the motion as amended. But in my view, the entire tenor of the amendment, as I recall from you speaking about it, was that this effectively kicks the can down the road yet again. Councillor Evans' motion proposed specific actions to be carried out to help us get a real insight into what's gone wrong, and so we can look at this, you know, with some proper vision. Instead, we have something which is to basically incorporate these comments into something to go to Cabinet and be looked at some point in the future. Effectively, the whole tenor of the amendment is to not allow the intention of the motion to go forward as intended. Therefore, it is negating the motion that was put forward. Now, clearly, as you say, you're entitled to take your own view on that.
You've heard my view. I think this is the third. That was the third time you've heard my view.
Would you at least put it into writing so we can consider it in the same way as you insisted that the original one was?
Councillor Brown, my chat facility is not working properly, which is why I couldn't properly read what Councillor Evans had written.
Would you therefore like to get one of the officers to put it in for you, please?
Pardon?
Would you like to get one of the officers to put it in for you, please?
I'm quite sure. Wendy, did you get the gist of mine, or would you like me to read it again?
I'll put what I got into the chat and then read it out, and if there's any change to that.
Okay.
Chair, bear with me a second. So what I've got is that this committee notes the findings of this review and the actions agreed by management, and the points raised at the meeting be part of the report going to the September overview and scrutiny panel.
Yes, that's exactly what I said, Councillor Wendy. Thank you very much. Just one moment, please. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to speak to the
Councillor Evans.
Does it matter? No. I'd like to speak to the amendment which you have proposed. Am I surprised? No, absolutely not. We've tried to bring in external auditors before, but you continue to vote it down. So I suppose my question is, you know, I've got a report in front of me that as a councillor, I've got to raise significant concerns about. I mean, these are serious failings that has exposed the council to risk of fraud. And your amendment, like Councillor Brown has said, doesn't achieve anything and just kicks us into the long grass. Now, I suppose my question is, Chair, what you got to hide? What I mean, bring in an external auditor, and you know what? If that auditor says that everything is perfect, I will go publicly and I will accept that. But the reality is that, you know, this has been going on now for decades, and the financial climate that we're facing today means we cannot continue the way we've been running this venue for the last few decades. There needs to be change. And I absolutely applaud Director Hollis for you know, some of the actions that he's already taken over recent months in relation to the Civic Hall. But I think, you know, based on what I'm reading here about what's happened historically, there has got to be some sort of external auditor come in. You know, I don't care if it's KPMG, Deloitte, or even Grant Thornton. Someone has got to do a top to bottom review of what is going on inside that building. Now, you know what? You know, I'm going to be voting against your amendment because it doesn't achieve anything, and you're just kicking this really serious matter into the long grass. And I would like to, I think given how serious this nature is, I am going to call for a recorded vote because I want it on paper how councillors vote on this. So it's actually included in the minutes. So when things happen in the future, we can come back and say, you know, Councillor X voted this way on this motion. But that's all I've got to say. I'm disappointed, but, you know, I'm not exactly surprised. But I mean, my question is, what you got to hide?
Councillor Beaumont.
Actually, point of order, Chair.
Sorry, who was that?
Councillor Tromans.
Councillor Tromans.
Yeah, point of order, Chair. Under the council's constitution, actually, Councillor Evans put forward an amendment, and you can't put forward an amendment to an amendment without having dealt with the amendment first. So we need to vote on Councillor Evans' one first before you can then amend it.
Councillor Tromans, Councillor Evans put forward a proposal, not an amendment, because the recommendation had not been proposed. So his was the proposal and seconded by yourself, and I moved the amendment, which is what we're discussing at the moment.
I think there's a misunderstanding there, Chair, because the recommendation is 2.1, and then Councillor Evans has added the extra one from after.
That recommendation was not moved. It was proposed by Councillor Evans. His proposal, as you heard it, it was seconded by yourself, and I moved the amendment. The recommendation as printed was not moved. Councillor Beaumont.
Thank you, Chair. The whole of this report includes responses by management and changes to the practices that were going on in the bar and the coffee bar. Now, this is, I'm tempted to use the expression small beer, but it's rather more serious than that, I suppose. But the first thing I did on reading this report was phone my local landlady and ask her what she does to clean her pipes every week. And does she think losing 30 pints is unusual and scandalous? And she said it's not unusual or scandalous. It's what you expect as part of your overheads of running a bar and running a pub. You have to clean your pipes and you lose beer as a result of that. So I had no concerns about the issues being raised, the decision about whether you continue to sell draft beer, because that is the cost, that's the overhead cost of having to drain the pipes and clean them, is for me almost a side issue. The real issue is the Civic Hall in a position to attract more people into its premises to drink the blasted beer in the first place? And that is an extremely difficult thing to do in current conditions. So I think going to a situation where you don't sell draft beer and your stock doesn't go to waste because it's in bottles is eminently sensible. There are a number of management actions in this report which are clearly designed to address the issues which the audit found, and I see nothing wrong with that. So what the real issue, I think, Chair, is the proposal that's been made is, I think, been by Philip ruled illegal. You can't instruct from council the executive to carry out actions. That is just not part of what a council can do. We have an executive and they get on with the job. We have a director, he's got on with his job. Your proposal is fine. It examines the situation, it lets the situation develop and have a further report at a later date so the whole thing can be put on the table with the results of the actions taken clearly in front of us. So I see nothing wrong with your proposal, and I would challenge whether the proposal by Kyle Evans is actually acceptable, whether Philip could not rule or yourself could rule that out of order altogether. It just doesn't stand up. You can't instruct the executive from council to carry out certain actions. That's the division of responsibility in local government that's been there since his lad was a dad. Thank you.
Councillor, remind members we are still speaking to the amendment. Councillor Sargent.
Fully support the amendment.
Councillor Sargent.
All right. I can't support the amendment simply because this seems to be going on for a long time, and you know, any business that came up with a report that we're faced with today would be in serious trouble, as far as I'm concerned, without the backing of the council. And you know, I think it's only right that you know, residents expect that you know, that these things are looked into. We don't just waste money willy-nilly. Going back to the wastage on the beer, I also contacted a couple of people that own pubs, and they said 24% was ridiculous. They look at 1 or 2% at the most. You know, nobody wants the Civic Hall to be closed down. What they want it to do is either break even or make a profit. Would be absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, Councillor Sargent. I have no more speakers. I will be moving to the recorded vote, and I will take the amendment proposed by myself, seconded by Councillor Beaumont first. Simone, could you do the honours, please?
Chair, I think Wendy will do this one.
Actually, I think I'm doing this, actually, Chair. So if this is in connection with the amendment moved by the Chair,
Yes.
if you could vote for, against or abstain. So Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Croft.
Against.
Councillor Elliott is, we have apologies, and I think it's Councillor Beaumont. Councillor Beaumont?
I think he's left the meeting just for a minute. He'll probably be back, Mr. Richardson.
I'll carry on then, Chair, and come back to Councillor Beaumont. Councillor Evans?
Against.
Councillor Daffy? For. Councillor Hocking?
For.
Councillor Longden?
For.
Councillor Pomfret? Councillor Pomfret? I'll come back to Councillor Pomfret, Chair. Councillor Sargent?
Against.
Councillor Tandy?
For.
Councillor Tromans?
Against.
Councillor Beaumont?
For.
Councillor Pomfret?
Councillor Pomfret is muted by the looks of things.
Could Councillor Pomfret unmute? Pomfret, you're still muted.
I've just seen a message that Councillor Pomfret can't unmute.
What do you wish to do, Chair?
Well, I would like us to get Councillor Pomfret's vote if that was possible. I don't know how else we can do it unless someone can contact him.
Councillor...
Sorry?
I was going to say, has Councillor Pomfret got access to the chat function? Because he could possibly note his vote there.
Wendy, could you try him on the chat function?
Are we able to vote by chat?
Well, under the circumstances of the mute button not working, I would imagine yes, we can.
The alternative, I believe, is to adjourn to allow Councillor Pomfret to resolve his issues.
Well, what we would normally do, Chair, is probably adjourn for 10 minutes and ask Councillor Pomfret to log out and log back in and see if he can come back into the meeting.
Okay, I'm prepared to adjourn the meeting until 7:45.
Thank you, Chair. We'll just need to check the live stream is
Yes,
operating.
yeah, we do need to. I was just going to mention that actually. Peter, Wendy, can you let us know when the live stream is back on, please?
Yes, Chair.
Steve. Steve,
The live stream is back on, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. Mr. Richardson, would you like to continue where we left the meeting, please?
Yes, Chair. We came to Councillor Pomfret's cast his vote when Councillor Pomfret had fallen out. So, Councillor Pomfret, are you for, against, or abstaining against the amendment?
I'm for the amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, based on the votes cast, that's 6 votes for the amendment, 5 votes against. So the amendment is carried and becomes the substantive motion.
Substantive motion, right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. So we will be moving on to agenda item 15.
Point of order.
I've moved
take
on
a vote on it, June.
I'm sorry, I don't know who said that. And I'm moving on to agenda item 15, the vote.
Sorry, Chair, you do need to take a vote on the substantive motion now.
Sorry, yes. Take a vote on the substantive motion.
Could I record for recorded vote, please?
I was just going to say that I expect there will be a request for a recorded vote. So could you do the honours again, please, Mr. Richardson?
Yes, thank you.
Vote on the substantive motion.
So the substantive motion is now that that was proposed by Councillor Tandy, seconded by Councillor Beaumont. So can you indicate whether you're for, against, or abstain? So Councillor Brown.
Abstain.
Councillor Croft.
Abstain.
Councillor Beaumont.
For.
Councillor Evans.
Abstain.
Councillor Daffin.
For.
Councillor Hocking.
For.
Councillor Longden.
For.
Councillor Pomfret.
For.
Councillor Sargent.
Abstain.
Councillor Tandy.
For.
Councillor Tromans.
Abstain.
That's 6 votes for and 5 abstentions. So the motion, as proposed by you, has been carried.
Thank you very much. We will now move on to agenda item 14, which is the Treasury Management Monitoring Report.
Chair, we still have item 13.
Oh, sorry. Actually, threw the wrong piece of paper away. Just one moment, please. Agenda item 13 is the internal audit plan.
Thank you. Yeah, this
Linda,
is.
I think. Is this you, Linda?
It is, Chair, yes. This is the internal audit plan, which would have come to Audit and Standards Committee in March for approval, but that meeting didn't happen. the plan at Appendix A on page 123 is the plan that would have been presented in March, but obviously because of COVID, the impact that it's had on services, different activities that have taken place within the authority because of COVID, I feel that I need to do a further risk assessment and reassess the work that the team are doing. The team, since lockdown, the team have been working from home and they've been working through the plan at Appendix A, doing as much as they can. But what I'm proposing with the plan is that I carry out the risk assessment and bring a further report with a revised plan if necessary to the November meeting of this committee. Also included in this report at section 5 is the work of the Counter Fraud Officer for the financial year 1920. He has identified for Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council, because this is a shared service, cashable savings to the public purse of over £176,000 and over £967,000 of notional savings. We calculate the notional savings using the formula that the Cabinet Office used for their data matching exercise. It is, for example, had there not been an intervention, a benefit claim, it is assumed a benefit claim would have continued for at least a further 21 weeks. So that's how that's calculated. So I think that's all I need to say. If there are any questions.
Any member? I see no hands, so I assume there is no dissent, so the report is carried. Thank you. Agenda item 15, which is the LGA Code of Conduct.
Sorry, June, it's 14 now with the Treasury report.
Sorry, my papers have all got mixed up.
No problem, Chair.
Okay, agenda item 14, the Treasury report. Go on.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Right, this is the final report for the last financial year. Ideally, it would have come previous, but obviously we've had difficult times. I'll start with the economic summary, and the final quarter saw a marked shift in economic activity across the globe. In the UK, we did start seeing interest rates increasing, but due to COVID pandemic and lockdowns across the world, we saw all of that reversed, with interest rates being slashed to a new all-time low, quantitative easing restarting, and indications that we're going to enter a period of recession. This has resulted in a central view that the bank rate will remain at 0.1% for the next 2 years. Borrowing rates are forecast to increase, but not to the levels that we'd previously forecast. Moving on to our own performance, the table at 5.4 shows that our investments at the year end stood at approximately 30 million. This compares to 36 mil at the same point the previous year, and this is in part due to us having repaid £3.5 million of debt, which was natural maturity. We've not yet replaced that, and some of the 1920 capital programme was financed by prudential borrowing, but a Treasury decision has been taken to utilise internal borrowing for the time being to reduce the cost of carry. Sections 5.9 to 5.21 cover our debt portfolio. No new debt was taken in the year, nor were any early repayments processed. The premiums due on early repayments make it completely unaffordable at the present time. The good news is our investment performance was way ahead of benchmark. At 522 gives that information. However, whilst the property fund is giving us a healthy yield on the quarterly payments, which for last financial year was 4.14%, the capital value has reduced by 70,000 over the year. And this is due in part to uncertainty for Brexit and more recently COVID-19. There's more information at section 5.25 and 5.32, which gives what the implications would have been on the council's investment returns had the current mitigation not been in place, which allows for these capital losses to be held on the balance sheet temporarily. Moving on to 5.36 and our capital financing requirements, our internal borrowing position has increased and now stands at 15.6 million. At the moment, we can manage that value of internal borrowing, but there will likely be a need that during 2021, I will need to take some external debt to manage cash flows, as it's not sustainable in the long term. I will liaise with Link, our Treasury advisors, as to when they consider the best opportunity to get back into the debt market, but also to look at other options and not rely on PWLB, because there are other players in the market now. As usual at year end, I do an analysis of our investment balances and what resources they're coming from. And there's a table at 5.37 of the report, which gives this information and shows that only a small proportion of our investments are really from the general fund and HRA balances, which could be used to support day-to-day services. Most of the investment balances are held up from ring-fenced cash, such as grants, contributions, capital receipts, and amounts specifically earmarked. The rest of the report gives out-turn information on debt and investment interest and the prudential and treasury indicators, and I have no issues or concerns that I think need to be highlighted to the committee. So the recommendation at section 2 is that the report be noted, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Craig. At this stage of the meeting, I need to move an extension of standing orders. The meeting is due to finish at 8 o'clock, so I will extend the standing orders until the end of the business. We only have 2 further items. Thank you. I have our guest who wishes to speak. Gory, please.
Oh, thanks very much, Chair. It's just more of a clarification, really. If I could just put Craig back to 5.4, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, net debt is 46,887, right? So, which is against last year was 2250, right? Now, what I would just like is on 5.15, you did mention that we are in an under-borrowed position. Could you clarify that, please?
An under-borrowed position means that we've incurred capital expenditure, which is the capital financing requirement, which I've referred to in section 5.36. That's how much capital spend we've had, which has been financed by borrowing. Now, we have options of actually using external debt from PWLB or other marketplaces, but we can actually internally borrow, which means I'm borrowing from our investment balances. So the cash that we've actually got out and placed in the investment markets, I'm using that instead of external PWLB or other sources. The table, which I've got covered in section, scroll through my agenda, table at 5.37 shows that if I was to have all my investments placed, I would have approximately £46 million invested. So my internal borrowing reduces that because I'm using my cash flow resources.
Okay. Will I just pull you back again now on 5.22, right? The net borrowing is 78,442, right? Under this weighted average. Now the actual on 5.4 is 77,205. Now there's a difference of 1,237. Now I know this is what do you do with that figure? Are you going to do some adjustment or?
Sorry, could you explain where you were looking again on the agenda?
Right, okay. I'm on 522, right?
Yep.
The total borrowing under the weighted average, right, is 78,442, right? Now, in the actual on 5.4, we got the 77,205. Now, the difference of 1, 2, 3, 4. What happened to that difference? What do you do?
The different figures really. The table at 5.4 is a snapshot position. So that was our actual debt on the 31st of March.
Yes.
So if you look at the opening position of debt was 80.7 million, and it closed 77.2. So throughout the year we'd repaid £3.5 million of debt. The average position across the year is that 78.4 million. Yes. So that's our annual average debt held.
Okay. So really, okay, that's fine. Maybe I'm thinking of account. I'm looking at that difference. That what are you going to do with it in the final accounts? Whether there's going to be an adjustment or not. It's not.
No, it's not an adjustment. They're different tables giving different scenarios.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. I have no further speakers, so I'll move the recommendation as printed. I see no dissension, so that is agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Craig, for your input. Agenda 15, the LGA Code of Conduct. I'm not sure who's presenting this.
Chair, it's Wahida.
Wahida, sorry, it is Wahida. Sorry, Wahida.
No problem, Chair. Chair, this report is to consider the Local Government Association's draft model Members' Code of Conduct, which is attached to the agenda. The consultation is open until the 17th of August, and the Code of Conduct has been prepared by the LGA based on recommendations from the Committee on Standards in Public Life following its review of the local government's ethical standards. Chair, the recommendation from the committee was for the LGA to update the model code in consultation with the representative bodies of councillors and officers in local government at all tiers. They're particularly interested in looking at the code in terms of the more recent increase in communication via online communication taking place remotely and online between members and residents, and in particular through social media. The objectives of the consultation are set out at paragraph 4.4 of the report, Chair, and the report is appended at Appendix A of the report. The questionnaire specifically designed by the LGA to obtain the views of officers and members is appended at Appendix B and would need to be completed online. I think the response that the LGA, I attended a webinar yesterday in response to this consultation, and the main comments from the LGA were that they were specifically seeking a response on whether it's felt that the draft code stands up to the newly introduced ways of working, and also whether if it gives enough of a steer on social media and online activity. Chair, the aim of the LGA is to conclude the consultation, as I said, on the 17th of August, and thereafter to present a final draft report to the LGA Assembly in autumn. Some of the major changes which were highlighted yesterday in the webinar was the change from moving from respect to civility, which they've defined in the code, and it's at page 151 of the agenda. Chair, the thinking behind this was that it encompassed the behaviour that can be expected from members and those in public life, and the expectation that all members have a right to expect courtesy in communicating with each other and in communications with members of the public. Chair, the only other thing that I'd like to point out is that in the Members' Code of Conduct, where reference is made to changes in square brackets, those changes would require legislative changes by the government. However, the LGA's view yesterday was that they're looking to seeking comments on those changes, and they are waiting for the government to provide a response to those recommendations. But in the meantime, they would welcome any comments and look to maybe lobbying the government if necessary. And as those comments are supported by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. Chair, I'm happy for the report to be discussed and the recommendations to be passed as printed on page 145, paragraph 2 of the agenda.
Thank you, Wahida. Any member wish to comment? I have to say I did I did suggest initially, because of our long agenda, that we could perhaps defer this to the next meeting, but as you heard Wahida say, the response has to be in by the 15th of August, so we had to bring it to this meeting. Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. Just before we start, I think technically the meeting's already ended, because I know you said you suspended standing orders, but
I didn't take a vote.
Have a vote to do that.
Tromans.
Sorry, Chair?
I didn't take a vote, did I, Councillor Tromans?
No. So we've gone over the 3 hours, so...
So I will move it again then, that this meeting be continue until the end of business. All those...
Point of order.
Is there a seconder for that proposal?
Point of order.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. What is your point? Who was the point of order? Sorry, my chat isn't working. I can't see what you said. Who said point of order?
Kyle Evans, point of order.
Yeah.
You can't take a vote because the meeting has ended.
Yeah.
You didn't do that you didn't do it in accordance with the Constitution.
Councillor Evans.
That's the Constitution.
Councillor Evans, please stop trying to make complete disruptions of these meetings. I did make a mistake in not taking the vote. I intend to take it now. I have not closed the meeting, and it is me who closes the meeting and no one else. So I will now move it again. I move that we continue this meeting until the end of business. Is that seconded?
I'll second that.
Seconded.
Thank you. Therefore, then, can I see Simone? Can you do the honours, please?
Point of order, Chair. Just before we do that, we would like to hear from Director Richardson or to know if we can do this retrospectively.
Councillor Evans,
you'll be wasting our time.
Councillor Evans, the meeting was not closed. Thank you.
Point of order, Chair. I would support Councillor Evans and Councillor Tromans on this. You're acting illegally. Is this Zimbabwe or Great Britain?
If I am acting illegally, then you know what to do about it, don't you? This meeting was not closed. I did not close this meeting.
Might I respectfully ask that you take legal advice, Chair?
Yeah, can we ask the officer?
Richardson.
Chair, on a point of order,
Mr.
you
Richardson.
actually said before 5 to 8 that you had to move standing orders because of the time. There was no objections then, and therefore you carried on with Wahida.
There was also no seconder and no vote.
Just
you need a vote, Councillor.
Trying to filibuster now again, and because they don't want to get on with it. That's the problem, and they don't like it. So. Nobody else can like it. So you did the right thing. You made the announcement before 5 to 8. There was no dissent, and therefore the meeting goes on as per.
There was no constitutional seconder and no vote.
Councillor Mr. Richardson, if you tell me that this meeting, I will end it now.
Could you bear with me, Chair? I think it is a legitimate point that has been raised, and I think I just need to. I'm just scrolling through I haven't got my copy of the Constitution with me. I'm having to use an online version. So, if you can just give me a minute or two, check what it actually says in terms of extending a meeting beyond 3 hours, which is the part that is pertinent in this case.
Chair, if I could just say for Director Richardson's, just to help him, it's 4A.8 of the Constitution.
I'm sure that Mr. Richardson is quite capable of finding finding it for himself.
I am grateful, actually, Chair, because it does help. So 4A.8, it says this, Chair. It says, unless the majority of councillors present vote for the meeting to continue, any meeting that has lasted for 3 hours will adjourn immediately. The only remaining business relates to members' questions. They shall be dealt with in writing, and the questions and responses will be minuted. The remaining business will be considered at the time and date fixed by in this case, it'll be the chair. If he or she does not fix a date, the remaining business will be considered at the next ordinary meeting. And I think where it says adjourn immediately, it does mean that it is a bit of a guillotine effect, that unless standing orders are extended, ordinarily the meeting would end. The slight complexity here, and I have to say it is a complexity, is that you did move the suspension of that particular procedure before the meeting, as Councillor Longden said. However, there was no seconder to it, so I'm in the ordinary course events, I'm reminded to say that without a seconder having seconded it before 8 o'clock, had they done so, I think we could have probably debated the issue as to whether to then take the vote. But I think because we're beyond 8 o'clock and we didn't have a seconder, I think you're going to have to accept that the meeting has guillotined.
Okay, thank you for that advice. I will immediately call an end to this meeting. And as I didn't catch everything you said, Mr. Richardson, because you were breaking up, but I think it was within my power to resume the meeting or call another meeting to finish the agenda. So that is exactly what I will do, and there will be a further meeting of this committee on the 13th of August. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
I see Councillor Evans and Councillor Brown think it's highly amusing. Well done. You keep meetings going when you want, but you don't want to do it at this point. I don't know what it is about the LJ report, but obviously you've got something